All right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Spellbreakers podcast. Today we have an absolute legend, a personal favorite of mine, a man who needs no introduction, but we will give one anyways out of respect. We have the legendary Tom Montalk of montalk.net. I would describe Tom as a philosopher of the ages. He's an experiencer. He is a deep thinker, critical thinker. Many of his works have really inspired me to seek the truth and to understand the nature of reality. And I would highly recommend anybody who hasn't been on montalk.net to go there. It is almost an encyclopedia of Tom's work. I feel like it should be chiseled somewhere on the planet because it's so much critical information. But yeah, thank you, Tom, for getting on the podcast. And how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, man. That's great. So I wanted to start off just a little bit for the listeners of your background. So my understanding is what kind of led you into your fields of study was a childhood experiences in abduction. So maybe you could walk us through, your kind of first experiences and what led you on the path that you are today.
Well, even starting out very early in life, I had a number of alien, ghost, and demonic experiences. So my mom, she is from Singapore, and being raised in an Asian culture, she was very familiar with ghosts and the sort of supernatural mysticism that they have over there that you don't really find as much in the West. And her mom was a shaman who was partially blind, but she could see spirits. So it kind of runs in the family. And I think I picked up some of those paranormal qualities myself. And so one of the earliest things I remember was definitely being visited in my room at night, being 6 months old, by some entity that in the dark would look over the edge of my crib down at me. There's this gray, creepy, wrinkly face with black eyes. Now, at the time, I didn't know what aliens were, so I would just scream the word ghost in German at the top of my lungs whenever this thing would come, and my parents would come running in, and of course, by that point, it would be gone. But that was my introduction to to the world, and that was actually my first word was Geist in German. So even before I said mom or dad in German, I said ghost. So that it kind of started my path quite early on.
Kind of sets you up for who you are today if your first word was ghost, eh?
Right, exactly. And was it it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing, is it like, did I become this way because of my experiences, or were my experiences invited and allowed in order to help me become, more familiar with these topics? And maybe it's a little bit of both. Sometimes it's hard to differentiate between cause and effect sometimes when we're talking about paranormal and nonlinear phenomena. But in the years after that, I would have quite a number of alien abductions as well, and my mom would be there too. And my mom at the time, she would always be waking up with these incredibly bad bruises on her thighs with puncture marks in them. And at the time, because once again, we weren't really thinking about aliens, she attributed it to the ghost of my dead great grandmother. Okay. So, and my mom actually left to Germany, visited Singapore for like 6 months trying to get away from this paranormal harassment. But it actually followed her there too. And she actually had some weird stuff too in Singapore before she ever moved to Germany. So it follows her around, it follows me around. And like I said, her mom had paranormal things too. So yeah, a lot of weird stuff. I had alien abductions for a number of years, dozens and dozens of times. I mean, it got so tiring that every time it would start again, I'd be like, oh no, not this again. Because prior to that point, prior to the beginning of an abduction, your memories tend to be blocked. So you don't really know that you're an abductee until it happens. And then it's almost like like an altered personality gets switched on, and all those memories of all the previous times, they come rushing back. So when I was a kid, when you're young, you don't really question what's going on too much because you don't really have a set worldview yet. So I took it as, well, this is the way things are. This is how the world is. And because my dad was an engineer and he kind of cultivated a sense of scientific inquiry in me, mm-hmm. I was questioning it, but more from a sense of curiosity, like trying to figure out what is actually truly going on. And it wasn't until I was about 12 years old that I got a library card and I read all the UFO books, all the UFO metaphysics books at my local library, all the physics books, and as much as I could between the ages of 12 and 18 until I went to college. So by the time I went to college, which I did for physics and electrical engineering, I I was extremely fascinated with the entire subject of ufology, spirituality, metaphysics, paranormal phenomena. And I went to college specifically so that I could learn both physics and electrical engineering in order to scientifically investigate how these UFOs worked, how alien technology works. And that's sort of what I've been doing most of my time when I'm not doing the Montauk stuff, when I'm not counseling people, emailing with them, and so on. I'm doing science. And all my science is geared towards trying to make breakthroughs that can unravel how they do what they do and how humanity can use it for good, for setting up the next phase of human civilization in a positive direction. So
Wow.
that's pretty much my story in a nutshell. I mean, there's so much more to it, but
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to take up the whole show.
No, no, for sure. Just a couple questions on that. So one, I've been become more aware of this concept of almost generational curses. Some native communities actually say it goes back 7 generations. Say, a curse, or let's say a haunting that happens in one generation can go on for several. I'm curious if you've ever kind of investigated that in terms of your own experiences and your lineage.
Well, my lineage, as far as I know, my family history, I don't know it beyond my great grandmother or great grandfather on both sides.
Mm.
Because one side, they came from China, and during World War II, it was a very harrowing experience for, I mean, my grandfather, when the Japanese were invading China and doing horrible things, he literally jumped into the water and swam his way to the nearby port, and then eventually in Malaysia and then Singapore. So he swam for at least 24 hours
Wow.
through the water. I mean, 'cause he was a street fighter. He was like a street boxer, so he's extremely fit, and he was born year of the tiger, so he's got that feisty energy. And he swam his way ultimately to Singapore. And so beyond him, though, we don't know too much.
Mm.
So all I know is my grandparents, and most of it comes from my mom's side, definitely. But just speaking by generational curses, just in general, what I've observed about it in other people is it's a combination of not only genetic traits, but also epigenetic traits. So epigenetics is how your DNA is turned on or off, like how your genes are expressed,
Mm-hmm.
at certain times more than others, right? So, and those patterns are it's an extra layer of information that is beyond just genetics. So, and that can also be handed down from parent to child. So through the generations, your things that you experience, the things that you think, the traumatic experiences that you go through, they imprint themselves epigenetically in your body, and that can be passed on. And the issue with that, however, is when you have a lot of alien experiences or you're dealing with ghosts or the paranormal, those experiences, they also induce reactions in you that imprint themselves epigenetically. So if generations earlier, some great 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 grandparent had interactions with otherworldly beings, some of that gets imprinted in the genetics, and that also gets handed down, and it can lead to psychic abilities if that's what it turned on. It can lead to, for example, victim mentalities if someone has had a line of demonic harassment going back many generations, and this sort of thing creates a feedback loop where negative paranormal beings can attach themselves to a bloodline and get passed down also from through the generations. And even very oftentimes, if generations live in the same house, there will be a paranormal entity or more entities that set up base in that house, and then over the generations they will continue harassing the next generation and the next generation and just feed off it and create almost like this sick codependent symbiotic relationship with the human hosts. So that entire thing, some people just say, oh, that's just ancestral karma. But if you really break it down, like what is karma really? Well, it's a combination of genetic stuff. It's a combination of paranormal entities that follow bloodlines around, and it's also like a soul lineage thing. Because the thing is, when you're born into a family, a lot of those souls in the family you've known before. That's the reason why you're together again. Okay. And so you have like past history with them, and so these patterns that built up in the past, they end up repeating again. And so it's this big complicated web of feedback loops and interactions spanning the physical to the biological to the paranormal, and those things all come together in shaping this thing that we call ancestral karma or ancestral curses.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. It's an interesting theory that I hadn't really heard before, and then I had an author, Bruce McDonald, on several times who's spoken at length about this. And for me, if I go back through my lineage, I see like generational curses, generational trauma, and even let's say the first layer, which would be psychological, I see it, right. Just trauma, but trauma and abuse begets more trauma and abuse, and then also the people around you are shaping what you think is real, what is possible, not possible, how the world is. And then it's kind of following the path most trotted, right.
Hmm.
But then there does seem to be another component as well, where maybe it's a vibratory thing where, as you said, genetically or epigenetically, maybe you have a similar frequency to that of your ancestors, right? And so there's an attraction or a familiarity there.
Right. Yeah, and that kind of speaks back to the epigenetic thing, because when genes turn on or off, it's not just about what proteins get made by your cells. It's not just about the physical component of it. We have to remember that DNA is an antenna, and it's a helical antenna, and there are charges. I don't know if they're, I can't remember if they're protons or electrons, but they're electrical charges that, as they go along it, they emit different pulses depending on the amino acids that make up the DNA, and so it almost like plays music as the electrical signals go through the DNA, and these signals, they're not regular electromagnetic signals. They're like scalar electromagnetic signals. And those kinds of waves, they interact with reality in a very strange way, almost at this quantum, almost etheric level.
Mm.
And that creates a very complicated interaction with probable futures, with the holographic nature of reality. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, ultimately, epigenetic expression can influence the types of beings, people, opportunities, events that you attract in life, right? So when we'll talk about this later with manifesting, for example, the manifestation phenomenon. So typically, it's known that if you do the manifesting thing, it takes a couple days for the momentum to really build up, for you to really start attracting things in accordance with your mindset. And I think part of that might have to do with the activation of certain epigenetic patterns within yourself, which do take several days to build up. So I think the physical, biological component of it adds to the effect.
Mm.
Uh, but that's just like a small time scale example. And so you can imagine how that can build up over the generations as these patterns are passed down, to where you can have bloodlines now where it's written into your biology, and therefore into your mindset and into what you attract, whether it's wealth, whether it's trauma, and abuse, or whether it's like paranormal things, demonic harassment, even alien interactions. All these patterns tend to recur through the generations because of this imprinting that happens both in our soul and in our biology.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, man, it's fascinating stuff. The field of epigenetics fascinates me as well. I've been following Bruce Lipton for a while. Is there
Hmm.
anybody else you'd recommend just to kind of dive a little deeper into epigenetics? Because I think it's the kind of frontier of science, and it's not openly discussed.
Right. I think if you combine his work with Rupert Sheldrake's work on the morphogenetic field,
Yeah.
those two are quite complementary. And then if you want to get more into the nitty-gritty details, perhaps of the mechanism behind it all, look into Stuart Hameroff
Okay.
and his theory of or theory. He did it with Stuart with Roger Penrose,
Okay.
and
Yep.
it's a theory about how quantum fields collapse uh, in accordance with conscious choice and observation, and how that works at a biological level with these little things called microtubules that make up a lot of our cells and our neurons and so on. Now, in other words, what he's saying is that biology is almost like a quantum computer, and the quantum computer, because it's quantum, it's sensitive to very weak, non-local, non-physical energy fields, which is essentially the soul or consciousness. So all these people have different pieces of the puzzle, and you have to kind of look at all of them and then interpolate how it might possibly work.
Yeah, and thank God we have you, Tom, to piece it together for us. It's so it's complex, and the
Mhm.
deeper I dive down into these topics, yeah, it's the less I know. But what's interesting is so much of it lines up with ancient religions, Even the Buddhists, I've recently found out that even Buddhists were talking about essentially reptilians, and also, the false light and getting away from the light. And it's funny to see, the parallels between not only what you've uncovered, but yeah, what a lot of these cutting edge scientists are saying. Do you feel that we're in a period of kind of a great awakening? Like, do you buy into that kind of new agey narrative that we are hitting a point of, disclosure or great awakening as it's primed, or do you think this is just another layer of the trap?
Well, the thing is, the thing is, humanity, humans, as programmed as we are, as much as we are ruled by our genetics, by astrology, by our social programming, there is another higher metaphysical agenda going on as well that expresses itself through us, through our intuition, through our synchronicities, our dreams. The, I mean, when you're born into this world, you have so many physical factors trying to crush your spirit, crush your soul, trying to make you go back to sleep, right? But invariably, that higher part of you, for a lot of people, it does tend to poke through here and there.
Yep.
And so, and the times that it pokes through, it pokes through at the right times to sway your direction into the future. So it alters your trajectory in a way that is in alignment with this higher divine agenda. And as long as you're in tune with it, right? Because some people, we are so trapped by our programming, our trauma, by our ego, our sacred cows and so on, that when this influence comes, we don't hear it because there's too much noise in our heads. And we've entrapped ourselves with too many poor choices, so that even if we wanted to get out, we have to fight our way through our own self-constructed prison, made of bricks of all of our false thoughts, our limiting beliefs, right? All our traumas and so on. But so we're caught in a war ultimately between spirit and matter, and the forces of matter, the forces that serve matter ultimately. Like, for example, you take demons, okay? Demons are just non-physical, malevolent intelligences, and their sole goal is to feed upon, corrupt, and destroy the soul and the spirit. All right, so that's their goal. But when they do that, what they're ultimately serving is matter. Because if the entire universe, if everything that exists is ultimately consciousness, then you have to ask yourself, then what is matter really? Well, matter is an asleep or programmed form of the greater consciousness. So it's the ultimate asleep, programmed form of consciousness. And why is that? Because it barely has any free will. It operates by mathematics, physics, programming, like algorithms, right? It's like a computer program, and we'll probably talk about that in a bit, about the simulation theory. So, the point is, spirit here has the ability to sometimes override that programmed aspect of it, and so that then over time it can accumulate into a so-called great awakening, in the sense that the indomitable quality of spirit is able to rise up against the oppression that has been foisted upon it. And actually, the Matrix trilogy, it talks about how no matter how perfect the Matrix was, because of the human consciousness element, certain anomalies would accumulate over time, and the anomalies would then coalesce into the one, and that's what leads to the eventual unraveling and then reset of the Matrix. That's why they had to keep resetting it, because these anomalies would keep building up. So spirit, ultimately, we are the bugs or the errors in the Matrix control system programming.
Wow, man, so deep. I feel like every time you speak, it's like a spider web. You know what I mean? Like, you're just, so many threads are connected there. One thing, that's really been interesting me lately is, this concept, like, we're seeing this split, exactly as you said, between, spirit and matter, right? Or, even broadly, even those who believe in a god versus materialists, right? And then within science, we see this battle between materialism and what I think is undisputed reality of non-local consciousness. I think the fact that we haven't had a single breakthrough in the public sector with any technology is the fact that we're still operating from this materialist worldview. And the work of Rupert Sheldrake and many others have proven to me, I think definitively, that we in fact don't live in a solid materialist world. That consciousness is fundamental.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and if you look at it, no matter what field of research that we're looking at, whether it's archaeology, physics, biology, politics, economics, each one of these areas is just saturated with lies and disinformation and oppression, false evidence, just psychopaths seeming to control it. On the other hand, each of those fields also has their mavericks that are trying to break through the suppression and present their alternative views, like Graham Hancock in archaeology, for example, or as we mentioned, Rupert Sheldrake and Stuart Hameroff and all them in the field of biology, for example. And so the battle, the split, the Great Awakening, it's happening pretty much in every area that we can conceive, even in religion.
Yeah.
You would think that, oh, religion is a control system, so therefore, some people think like all religion is bad, but no, within religion you also have a split within forces that serve matter ultimately in the guise of religion, and those that are trying to pull in a higher spiritual truth, like a higher Gnostic spiritual truth, and infuse religion, bring the life back into what is ultimately a dead husk, that is a couple thousand years out of date.
Man.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, 100%. I was raised Christian. I still have a very soft spot for Christianity and the teachings of Jesus. I try to practice every day, and I love, just we all fall short, right? And that's something that really speaks to me about Jesus. And also the fact that he says the kingdom of heaven dwells within you, right? That to me, this concept of an actual living God, I wish more Christians would embrace, because to me, there does feel like there is a loving creator that's kind of guiding us, out of what feels like almost a hell realm, doesn't it? Right? If we really, I've spent a lot of time really just looking at the world objectively, and I pretty much concluded years ago when I was like 16 that this is essentially a very sophisticated plantation. And then the more I got into the spiritual side, it really does feel like a energy harvesting device. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's fascinating. So I guess for you, do you think that there is a one God? Where do you come in at in terms of your spirituality? Like, are you more think of the illusion of separateness? Yeah, like where are you coming in, Tom? I'd be curious.
So my parents, they decided to raise me in a very free way. They didn't foist any religious beliefs on me. They allowed me to decide for myself, but at the same time, they also exposed me to different ideas. So I had a lot of time to be creative, to ask questions, to look into things. So it wasn't like a total hands-off approach, but it wasn't an overbearing programming approach either. And I was very fortunate in that sense. Now, interestingly enough, my mom, because as I mentioned, she was born in Singapore, she was raised Buddhist, and she was Buddhist for most of her life. But for the last 10 years of her life, she converted to Christianity. And the reason why she did that is because she had a near-death experience due to a heart attack brought on by a lot of stress due to custody battles and stuff. But anyway, so she had a heart attack, and she was dead for, I don't know, like 10, 15 minutes. And during that time, she saw the white light, she saw the tunnel, and a voice from it basically told her, because she was having suicidal thoughts at the time, because she figured with the horrible way the custody stuff was going, that what if she just threw herself in the Mississippi River and just end it all. And so the voice told her, the way you're feeling right now, well, because my younger brothers were in the room next door, and right before she fully passed over, she yelled out their name, and they came in, and that's how they were able to call 911, to get the medics there. And so they're crying next to her, realizing that she was dead, but she could still hear them. So she was paralyzed. She's like partly out of body, and she could hear them crying, and she just felt such pain, realizing now that she'd be leaving them behind if she fully died. And so the voice said, the way that you're feeling right now, if you were to kill yourself, you'd feel that 1,000 times more.
Wow.
And then so it asked her, do you really want to die? And she said, no. And basically it said that, well, it wasn't your time anyway. So she got sent back to the body, and this is like 15 minutes later. She popped her eyes open, and the medics were like, they jumped back because they thought that she was dead. I mean, they gave up doing CPR on her, and without doing any CPR, her heart started on its own, And so now she was alive again. All right. So now she had a second chance at life. And so for the next more than 10 years, she dedicated herself to basically redeeming all that bad stuff that had happened. And part of that involved having almost like a religious conversion experience where she saw a religious program on TV one night when she woke up, and the minister or the preacher was basically saying, "Do you want to know God? Do you want to know Christ?" And she felt such an upwelling of wanting, like spiritual wanting for that, that she said yes. And from that moment on, it's almost like her psychic abilities got jacked way up, and she was able to tap into a higher intelligence, which to her was definitely essentially the Lord,
Mhm.
you know. But the thing is, I do think that if she had been Indian, then
Mm.
she would have said like, oh yeah, this is definitely Krishna that's talking to me. Whereas with her, because of with the Christian context, to her it was Christ. But of course, anyone who knows astrotheology and mythology, we know that Christ and Krishna and some of these figures, they overlap in many ways, right? So I do think that I think a lot of religion is merely the human view of the divine. It's like a lens, you know, it's an avenue. You know, it's just one of the many terminals that goes to the departure point,
Mm.
to a higher spiritual intelligence, right? So no matter what religion, you know, even if you're some jungle tribe with your jungle type belief system, you can still tap into the exact same set of higher divine intelligence, both within you and externally to you. But it's just going to filter through whatever your belief system is. It's going to take that form because that's the only way that it can reach you. Like why, if you're a Christian, would a higher divine being take the form of Krishna or some other religious figure, right? Like
Mm.
it doesn't make sense. I mean, there are cases perhaps where a Muslim might have an experience with Jesus or vice versa, but those are quite rare. And I think generally I do think they take whatever form is needed to kind of reach you. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, I just had a Gnostic informant on yesterday, actually, and we talked a lot about the evolution of religion, right? And like historically, and I find it very fascinating. Yeah, it goes to very, very similar to what you're saying. Uh, but what I think is actually most interesting about your saying is you're kind of behind the words you just said is this concept of decoding, right? Our minds or our brains are decoding mechanisms, right? So there are phenomena that exist, right? And our eyes, if you just look at what we perceive, we're talking of fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percentage of reality, right? So we're decoding through our lens and our belief systems, right? And I think this isn't just limited to religious experiences, right? Because exactly as you said, in near death experiences, Muslims mostly see Muhammad, right? Christians see Christ, Catholics see, Mother Mary. But with respect to aliens as well, I would really like to understand, to what degree um, our our mindset is decoding what we perceive as, say, grays or reptilians, right? So, for example, like when I first started studying, aliens and UFOs, a lot of it, I honestly just thought they were like special military craft, right? Like,
Mhm.
black ops type of stuff, and I'm sure a lot of UFO sightings are. But the more I started to meet people that I, trusted, there is this real phenomenon of aliens. And when I found your work, not only your background but also others, there is clearly I think it's like 3% of the world population has these types of abduction experiences, right? And if you go through the literature, this is centuries old phenomenon, and they don't always appear the same way, right? And even alien abduction stories in like the early 1900s were just like monsters, whereas now they have a more technological component. So a long-winded way of kind of asking you, what we perceive as aliens, right? Do you think that is actually their form, or do you think we're witnessing a phenomenon, that our mind is decoding as such? I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts.
I do think it's both because we're dealing with a multispectral phenomenon. And I mean, essentially, anyone who says that aliens are strictly only one thing, like all aliens are good, all aliens are bad, all aliens are physical, all aliens are just non-physical interdimensional phenomena. For each of those cases, you can always find numerous counterexamples
Hmm.
to to disprove that that's the only solution, right? So essentially, we're dealing with a very broad set of phenomena with different types of beings from different origins. Some could possibly be time travelers. There's
Hmm.
some evidence that suggests that. Some are definitely non-physical interdimensional beings, which we would call ultra terrestrials, and some definitely have a physical component as well, a technological component. And the problem is our language isn't accurate enough to distinguish between all these different cases. So that's why we call it all aliens, but then we're confused when one theory doesn't account for all of it, right? Because we're dealing with it was a syndrome, it's a multispectral thing. And of course, yes, the secret government, black ops, they have their ships which display anti-gravity capabilities, the ability to accelerate at super high speeds and make right angle turns, just as alien craft supposedly have. But then the question is, well, where do they get it? Do they develop it on their own? Or do they reverse engineer crashed alien ships? And there's many cases, like David Grush, for example, and all the people that he's talked to, talking about crashed non-human ships having been reverse engineered and being locked up in these secret programs where they're studied and the technology is extracted from it and used for military applications. So many things are going on, but even beyond all that, if you just look back in time a little bit, if you look back in time before the age of the secret government, before the age of the military industrial complex, for example, you've got the Native Americans talking about the Star People
Hmm.
and how for generations and generations and generations, they've been interacting with these, technological, magical people from the stars. Now, are those just ghosts? Are they demons pretending to be? Well, the thing about Native Americans, though, is they didn't engage in black magic, blood sacrifice rituals necessarily with these star people.
Hmm.
And the star people themselves told the Native Americans that there are bad forces out there as well to be wary of. And so likewise, there was like a positive symbiotic relationship between the so-called star people and certain Native American tribes that had a relation with them, which wasn't a big deal because if both of them are spiritual and Native Americans, they're not in charge of nuclear weapon stockpiles. They're not in charge of the greater world order. So it's not a big deal for an alien group or something to make contact with them and have a relationship with them because their influence kind of stays where it is. It doesn't affect the rest of the world.
Hmm.
So I think that's one reason why Native Americans probably were seen as relatively benign to these non-human intelligences, and so therefore the relation was more open with them than it was, let's say, with Europeans in the 1500s, where by that point we were already developing technology, and we had the potential to one day grow into what we have already become now, this nuclear-equipped race of simians that we have a lot more danger and risk and potential for them to make contact with us now because of just how fragile everything is. So what I'm saying is, for people who say that aliens are strictly just an invention of the government, you have to also look back in time some more. Native Americans, the ancient Dogons, for example, the Dogon tribe in Africa, talking about how many generations ago beings came from the sky who claimed that they were from the star system Sirius. And they actually taught them astronomy and taught them about Sirius B and Sirius C, the other two stars, which at the time astronomers barely even knew about, but eventually they confirmed that, yeah, there is exactly a third star, just like the Dogon tribe said. How would they have even known that, right?
Yeah.
Why would, why would, see, because one of the theories that has been proposed is that aliens don't actually exist and they're just ghosts or demons or something that are playing to our scientific, secular mindset,
Yep.
and that's why they put that on. Well, why did they do that to a Dogon tribe centuries ago, who didn't even have technology? See, that doesn't make sense. And you find many examples of that throughout history where sky beings or advanced humanoids contacted primitive humans and displayed technological capabilities to humans who didn't even have or even had the capacity to understand what that technology was. See, there's no motive there for them to demonstrate that. Right. So, but that doesn't mean that such deceptions don't happen. It doesn't mean that aliens nowadays aren't putting on some sort of charade. But from everything that I've looked at, from all the cases, all the books, all the people that I've known, the part of the charade that I picked up on is that they might hide their true technological capabilities and merely put on a charade in a way that conforms to our expectations. So, for
Okay.
example, back during many decades ago, when, for example, there was a Cold War, people were worried about nuclear weapons, nuclear power, the nuclear age, the
Yep.
1950s, 60s, 70s, right? During that time period, that's when a lot of contactees were being told by these beings about the dangers of nuclear weapons, and later on, how the Greys, certain Greys even said that, oh yeah, in our past, on our planet, we had a nuclear catastrophe. And because of that, we had to go underground, and we mutated into these forms, like bigger eyes to see in the dark underground, and smaller forms so we could fit through the smaller spaces, which is bullshit anyway. But that's the excuse that's the excuse that they gave because it fit our cultural expectations. See, the truth might have been that it's not even that simplistic. It's not wasn't There was never a nuclear catastrophe. Maybe well, that gets too much into the realm of speculation, but it could have been something way more science fictiony than even that, or even something more occult than that, right? So it's not necessarily that they are non-physical ghosts. It's more that they are something that is alienish, but with interdimensional capabilities, with
Mm.
quantum capabilities, with things that we can't quite comprehend yet. But they want to keep that stuff secret. They want to keep that science, that knowledge secret, so that it doesn't contaminate us and make us shift the balance of asymmetric power that they have over us. They don't
Mm.
want to let slip that their true capabilities and the true technologies. And so they give us these excuses that fit our cultural expectations and make us think like, oh yeah, they're just using quantum physics and relativity to what they do, when in truth they're using something that's even beyond that, right? But
Mm-hmm.
but that's all they let slip. So yeah, there's lots of deception going on. But like I said, if you look back in time, they've always been to some degree technological. And earlier when you mentioned how in the early 1900s a lot of the contacts were just monsters or some weird things, we did have a plethora of different types of beings that were contacting people. And see, the issue is these beings, no matter what type they are extremely telepathic. Right, so they're able to induce hallucinations in people. And so even if there had only ever been Greys or only ever been reptilians or Nordics or these common types that we hear about nowadays, even if that were the only aliens that ever existed, they would still have the psychic ability to project numerous different forms in people in order to disguise their true thing. But the problem is that over time, because they've ramped up their activities and have contacted so many people and so many abductions, that over time, I think the disguise starts to slip, and we start accumulating more data, more information about who they really are, what they actually do look like. And so that's why I think nowadays we get that recurring pattern of Greys, reptilians, Nordics, mantid type beings. Those are the four types that keep coming up over and over again, because all that noise earlier on in the 1900s, over time, has sort of like fizzled out, and has kind of a bigger pattern has emerged from it. And so nowadays we are where we are in ufology because of all the data that we've accumulated, and the fact that so much of what might actually be going on is starting to actually slip out.
Wow. Yeah, that's very fascinating, and I just find it almost impossible to separate fact from fiction. Right? There's like just the UFO alien community broadly. There are a lot of grifters in there, and then
Hmm.
limited hangouts as well, and people were just like full on scammers. Like they've been busted scamming and lying, and there's not like they're government agents. They just made money lying to people, right?
Right.
Um, and it's really hard for me to really like, I don't know where to place a lot of what I call genuine phenomenon. I don't know how to place it, and so what I mean by that is, people talk about the Eisenhower meeting, right? And then other people talk about kind of in the similar to the ancient aliens vein, that we were genetically manipulated, and these might be, the people who are manipulating us, right? What people called the gods are just these beings that have turned Earth into almost like a mining colony or something for them, right? Or they're just interdimensional beings or demons in disguise, right? Like our embodied demons, that are filling with us, right? And when you read a lot of these abduction stories, they're taking samples, they're taking ovum, even women talk about being implanted with babies, so for me it's just like almost impossible to really parse out what's happening. It doesn't seem good though. And so, I'm very skeptical of a lot of people today who are like, some are openly talking about like, we need to make contact with Greys. We need to start letting them in. They're all, benevolent, lovely people, and then you read, the works that like you've talked about and others who I think are very legitimate, who say the exact opposite. So I'd be curious, just like your worldview in general of the alien phenomenon, which I'm sure you've studied in great length, far beyond most people. Like, what do you think is going on?
Okay, well, this is based on my personal experiences and also the fact that I've been researching this nonstop since I was 13. So 30 years, so 3 decades. I've been trying to figure this out. I've talked with at least hundreds, if not thousands, of experiencers and UFO researchers, in addition to the other, 10, 20, 30,000 other people about other topics. So, and I've studied physics, alchemy, mythology. I mean, I try to cover as broad of a field as I can, because like you said, it is very confusing because we're dealing with a very complex phenomenon that tries to hide itself. It doesn't want the truth about itself to be known, right? And then you've also got all those scammers and grifters, and as you said, limited hangouts, like disinformation agents, essentially.
Yeah.
And so how do you sort through that? Well, it's a lot like how astronomers use giant radio antenna arrays to try to probe the distant reaches of the universe. Find galaxies that are just so far away you can't even see them with a telescope, right? Well, they do it by aggregating a huge amount of data and then using filtering software to take out the noise and then trying to find that faint signal of what they're looking for. And the same thing with this. You have to deal with as much data as possible from as wide of a field as possible. And so that's what I've done. Now, I'm not saying that my viewpoint is the absolute 100% truth. I'm just saying that I've done the best that I possibly could with the data that I had, while also being mindful of my own sacred cows, my own biases, my own shortcomings. All right, so with that preface aside, my view, all right, so my view is that we are dealing with non-human intelligences that come from all places of existence outside of our current local space-time. So that can mean from parallel realities. It can mean from the future, from the ancient past, if they're time travelers. It can be from a higher realm, a higher dimension beyond the physical. All right. So we have this gamut of other places, other beings, other times that for whatever reason they're here now, probably because humanity, Earth, this period in our history is sort of a nexus point or a switch point on the grander scale of a timeline that affects other beings, other realities, and so on in the future. So whatever happens in the distant future, a lot of it probably can be traced back to what's going on right here, right now. And so you have an interest by a diverse selection of different beings, some more positive, some more negative, some more neutral, that have a stake in what's going on right here, right now. All right. And at the very highest level, you can look at it from a divine spiritual viewpoint, which is that we are God sparks. We are God sparks that are here in this this programmed dream simulation, which has an energy farm component to it, or a funny farm component to it. Because if you think about humanity and just how spiritually insane a lot of us are, and asleep and programmed and just backwards, right? It's almost like a funny farm, not just an energy farm. But there's that component. There's a school component to it. What I'm saying is that there are spiritual agendas, there's alien agendas, there's human political agendas, and they're all stacked atop of each other, and and to some degree interacting with each other. So it's a very complex experience that we're having here on Earth. And as far as the alien component goes, well, the aliens they're concerned about their own survival, their own resources, their own power and reach, and so on, right? Either protecting it, preserving it, or trying to expand it. And so we have competing alien agendas that are intersecting here right now, and it's all sort of coming to a head. And I think the reason why it's coming to a head is because human evolution itself, like our civilizational evolution, we're reaching a critical point in terms of power, technology, self-awareness, just a sense of maturity that is starting to make us become a threat to certain alien agendas. We're not just primitive tribes that we're not just an agrarian civilization anymore.
Yeah.
We have the capability now, due to our black programs and our black ops technologies, to colonize the moon, Mars, to intrude upon what they perceive as their own territory that they've dominated for cycles of civilization beyond even ours, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think they're trying to take control of it by some of them are trying to take control of it by infiltrating our power structure and to ensure that when this technology develops, it's used as they want it to be used.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Because the thing is, so if aliens had taken a completely hands-off approach, I think our Black Ops programs would have eventually, it might have taken longer, but they would have eventually developed anti-gravity, interdimensional phasing technologies, free energy to be, and then like weapons we can't even imagine. And so in order to get ahead of that, I think they made deals. So when you mentioned the Eisenhower Treaty, for example, I mean that's conspiracy rumor that you can't really confirm, but a lot of things point to it. A lot of things point to it. So for example, during that time period where the Eisenhower Treaty was supposedly made, I think it was like 1954. Like it wasn't. I think it was right around the time period.
Yep.
There were a number of contactees who were in touch with the Nordic beings, who had a pretty good relation with them. And then within about that 10-year time window, these contactees were essentially told that things have turned bad and we can't be around you. We can't be here anymore to the degree that we were before. And a lot of them pulled back, and they had to kind of tighten their security and limit the amount of contact that they could make. And that correlated with the Eisenhower Treaty, supposedly, where the Nordic alliance was rejected, that the treaty was rejected. Why? Because there were other alien factions that promised, technology, power, intelligence to the government. And at the time, the government was dealing with the Soviet Union, the Cold War, and they were worried about it. So the government was like, "Yeah, heck yeah, we're gonna take these guys over you, space hippies, because we don't want your wisdom, we don't want your advice, we don't want to denuclearize ourselves. We want what we need to protect national security." So a deal was made with the devil, most likely. And if you look at what happened after that, within 10 years, you had JFK taken out. And just, and not too long before that, you had Eisenhower warning about the military-industrial complex before he left office. That was his going away speech. So if you put all those pieces together, everything kind of supports each other. That some sort of switch happened at the time, and essentially what you had is you had a black ops military-industrial complex, CIA program or conglomerate like a giant monster that was in alliance with certain negative alien factions, and they took over a lot of the functions of the real power control system on Earth from that time forward. And so everything from the 1960s onward has been under is moving towards the apex of what nowadays we would call the Great Reset, which is the opposite of the Great Awakening. A lot of that developed around that time, probably due to alliances made with non-human powers that had humanity's best interests not at heart.
Wow, yeah, that really tracks, because like if you look just even in terms of like the lives of citizens, yes, way more material wealth has been created since then. But if you look at anything from like average household buying power to health outcomes to, childhood death rates to diseases, obesity, mental health disorders, it literally since the 60s, everything is just getting worse. And so, yes, a lot has been pointing me in that direction. Like the 70s, 80s had a bit of a bump because they got off the gold standard, but for the most part, everything's just been getting worse. And it's such a fascinating time to be alive. Like, I love George Carlin's take, we have front row tickets to the freak show. It really feels like that. And even in my own life, like I live off grid, but even trying to plan like 3-5 years ahead, there just seems to be like it's almost impossible to, it feels, to plan ahead, right? Like thinking about maybe moving to another country, and then it's like maybe the US dollar doesn't exist anymore, maybe you can't get on a plane if it just I don't know if maybe every generation felt this way. Like I'm sure during World War II people thought it was like the end times, but something feels like it's almost the singularity, as they say, where World War III could break out, the US dollar could tank, we could merge with AI. I am, in my heart, I feel very optimistic, but it just feels like we're in this time period, where it's almost impossible to predict like what's going to happen. Do you feel the same? And yeah, like where do you think we are in history, in terms of our species? 'Cause it feels unprecedented, but
Yeah, well, we're definitely at a fork in the road. We're definitely in a fork in the road because see, okay, so there's a number of extra system factors that are coming in that are beyond our control, that are beyond the control of the Black Ops secret government, that are beyond the control probably even of alien factions. Okay, and I'm talking about cyclical global cataclysms, things to do with the sun, with the center of the galaxy, with certain energy waves that sweep through the galaxy that hit Earth, comet cycles and so on. Um, if any of that stuff were to happen within our lifetime or even within the next century, well, these beings, they are precognitive and they're very smart and they have a lot of data, so they would know that something is coming up that would just utterly transform human civilization in a very cataclysmic way. All right, they'd be aware of it. The secret government would also be aware of it because they're also very smart and they have data that we don't have access to. So they would also know. So then, isn't any surprise that a lot of these governments and secret government stuff, they've been doing nothing but building underground cities and bases probably since the early 1900s, knowing that within a century or within 2 centuries, something really bad was going to happen, right? So we have to keep in mind that a lot of what's been happening since that time period, especially since the 60s, seems to have been geared towards a coming time period where civilization as we know it will not exist in the form
Yeah.
that we know it, right? Now, it's not an extinction level event where everything that we're doing now is completely pointless because they're not acting like that. They're not acting like everything is pointless. They're acting as if there's going to be major disruptions and an opportunity to transform or rework Earth and humanity and civilization. So so and I think COVID, the lockdowns and so on, they were a very small, tiny, tiny, tiny preview of
Yeah.
that, of
Yeah.
their mentality, because they manufactured a crisis and they used it to try to do social engineering. They try to use it to accomplish as well everything that we've seen,
Yeah.
and they're still trying to push it. But but here's the thing. What have we also seen? We've also seen that there has been a counter movement to that.
Yeah.
So it didn't go exactly how they planned. There's been counter movement to it, and it's actually served to catalyze and awaken a large number of people in the population. See, so that's the thing that we can't account for when we talk about these doom trends, is that when we talk about doom trends, we're looking at data that is obvious to us that, I mean, the writing is on the wall for a lot of it, right? Because the data exists right now. We can see that the US dollar is headed for collapse, for example. We can see that. We can see that World War III it's already happening, but it hasn't gone fully hot yet, but it very well could. So we see that, but what we don't see is the synchronistic latent spiritual potential within humanity to counter that each step of the way, because none of that is evident. There's no like plan that's out in the statistical figures. There's no like white papers and government documents being put out there that show that, oh yeah, in 2 years there's going to be someone that comes up with this idea or this spiritual movement or whatever that's going to counter that. Those things just happen spontaneously as we go because it's being directed by something, by higher intelligence that is beyond linear time, beyond physical matter, and so therefore it's always going to be surprising. It's kind of like in some of the parables of Jesus when he talks about the kingdom of heaven and what the kingdom of heaven is like like the grain of a mustard seed, or there's a lot of element to it that indicates butterfly effect or
Mm.
synchronistic power, divine orchestration at just the right moments in order to shift the odds in the favor of a positive outcome. So as much as the doom is obvious, we can't say that that's the only thing, and that's probably why you might be feeling optimistic without knowing why, because there's nothing logical or evidence based that can tell you right now that's going to be positive. But we do know that there's a divine agency at work that can insert surprises at the right moments, because it has already so far, and it will continue to do so.
Wow. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, I just find it very entertaining. I decided years ago to get out of the city, and so I live in a beautiful place near nature. Like I'm covered, you know, but I still care about my brethren, and it's really tough out there, right? So I live in Canada. I don't know if you knew that, and you know, it, one thing I find very fascinating is just that Canada is a good example where like literally nobody trusts our political leaders anymore. And it's not
Hmm.
even like there is a lot of anger and rage, but a lot of it is just this collapse of confidence. And I think that was maybe the the unintended consequence of, yeah, COVID and the lockdowns and a lot of these things where literally just trust in institutions, government, the system in general is just in the toilet worldwide. We see this, pretty much every leader in the G20 has like the lowest approval ratings in the history of their country, right? And I just wonder, like, what happens if that gets worse? Like, what happens when a majority of the world literally just doesn't trust their government, doesn't trust, the banking system, and just doesn't consent? Because I concluded a while ago that there does seem to be some type of, like, this, I argue that it's a consent positive realm in a lot of my podcasts. And I don't mean consent in that you voted for it or they ask you openly. I mean, they use subtle manipulation to get a critical mass of people to at least tacitly accept the agenda, right? And, well, just on that point, maybe, what are your thoughts on that? Because it really does seem that almost everything they do, like, for example, COVID, right? Their actual boots on the ground, tyranny, boot on your neck, maybe more accurate, happened, right? But it was maybe 3% or less of the actual tyranny, which was us doing it to each other, right? I really don't think they could have actually done any of that if we didn't do it to each other, kind of like a crabs in the bucket situation. So, sorry, just every time I listen to you, I have like 20 thoughts. So I'm trying to kind of articulate this together, but I'd be curious, to what extent do you think let's say the current system or, modern day slavery or trap that we're in this world is by the consent of the people, and what happens when people in mass just literally stop acknowledging these people as having any type of power?
Well, the issue with consent is that it's ultimately an occult phenomenon. Because what you find in, whether in the alien field or like in demonology, for example, or possession, these entities, they always try to gain consent in one way or another. These entities, they always try to gain consent through, but see, the thing is, they don't just ask outright. I mean, they do sometimes, but other times they don't. Other times, one of the fallacies or issues that we have to look out for is the idea that consent is all or nothing. That's black or white, 1 or 0. It's not. It's a matter of degree. It can be like 0.001. It can be 0.5. It can be 0.7. It doesn't have to be 0 or 1. It can be a matter of degree. And so, especially in Christianity, with the idea that the devil or Satan tempts us. And over time, through us giving into temptation, we fall deeper and deeper under his grip. That archetype applies to aliens. It applies to demons. It applies to these corrupt elites that are trying to push a tyrannical global totalitarian system. And I think the reason why they try to gain consent is for a number of reasons. One reason is because it is very efficient to do so. It's more efficient to get someone to come with you than to try to grab them by the collar and grab them, right? It takes a lot of manpower, a lot of force, a lot of energy and time to do that. And that's also one of the reasons, just as a side note, why some of these negative alien factions have waited until now to make their big move in terms of disclosure and trying to take things over more overtly, is because if they had tried to do that, let's say in the 1500s, we didn't have the technology back then, other than the Catholic Church, really, to control our own population in a very efficient and powerful way. But nowadays, we've got satellites, soon artificial general intelligence, cameras all over the place in our phones and our computers, on the street corners, 5G, right? All these things, all this technology that we have right now is a control system that makes control way more efficient. And so if there's anything to be said about these beings, is that they are extremely, well, I don't want to say lazy, but efficient. They're very efficient. And gaining consent is one of the most efficient things you can do. If you can get an entire planet, to enslave itself and then do what you tell it to do, that is the ultimate form of efficiency. Because in theory, it would take only one alien to control an entire planet if the entire planet is under the control of a global government that obeys that one alien's commands. Now, I'm not saying there's only one alien. I'm just saying in theory, that does all it takes, right? That's like the ultimate form of efficiency. So that's one reason why consent is important. The other reason is probably because there might be higher laws, whether cosmic laws or metaphysical laws, that are enforced by divine beings for their own reasons and for our benefit, that are enforced unless we abdicate that protection, unless we give it up. So if we give consent to these things, then that kind of gives up that protection because we willingly chose to take the dark path,
Hmm.
right? So these negative forces, if they want to get at you, if they want to be efficient, and if they want to bypass the protection, they have to gain consent. So I think that's why the consent is such a big part of it. Now the issue is that once they gain enough consent, once they hit a certain threshold of consent, at that point they can take physical action in ways that they couldn't before that.
Hmm.
And we see that throughout history. We see that in the Cultural Revolution in China, the Communist Revolution in Russia, right? Up to that point, they use manipulation, political maneuvering, and propaganda to try to get the people on board. But once enough people get on board, once enough people then get into power and are supported by the people, they can combine the two to crush the opposition physically, militarily,
Hmm.
or through famine, like they did in Ukraine, for example, the Holodomor. Those things, that's like the checkmate situation that is always a threat. It's always nipping at our heels. And so what right now only seems like political maneuvering with well, like we saw during the lockdowns, for example, or what a lot of big tech is supporting and TikTok and so on in terms of certain narratives that the young people are being programmed with, certain political orientations and so on. Right now, it's just all cultural stuff, it's political stuff, but eventually it can come a time where that turns into a checkmate situation where they would go for genocide or starvation or mass political imprisonment and so on. So that's what we are headed towards if we don't stop it sooner, you know?
Yeah.
So, right. So although permission is such an important component of it, a point comes where it is checkmate. And then it's no longer permission, then it's just pure physical force. And you ask, well, what people do at that point? Well, there's going to be insurgency groups. There's going to be well, let's just leave it at that. There's going to be insurgency, possible civil war, because people are not going to take it laying down, especially nowadays where, unlike the past, where populism was based on just pure demagoguery and propaganda, and people just like the French Revolution, for example. With the French Revolution, it was a populist revolution driven by Masonic conspiratorial forces. They were the ones that were directing it, but they were harnessing this blind cultural rage against the elite of France at the time, the aristocracy. Nowadays, it's slightly different because nowadays populism is being driven by a culture of being based, of being truth based.
Yeah.
Right? Truth based.
Yeah.
And once you know truth, once you learn something and see something, you can't unlearn it. It's not just ideology; it is knowing. And so, therefore, nowadays populism has a lot more staying power behind it than other populist movements in the past. So therefore nowadays, the more authoritarians try to crack down on it, the more it proves the point that they are what they are, right? And so it's going to come to a head. It's going to come to a head. It's going to come to physical force unless it can be diffused beforehand.
Yep.
But at some point, it's going to pass over into force, and then it's going to be tough because by that point there will be not only drones but probably humanoid drones, robot swarms, and so on. And so, I mean, worst case scenario, it would turn into like a Terminator future war against the machines kind of thing. Hate to say it.
Worst case.
But that's worst case. Worst case.
Yeah,
with aliens thrown in, and
I know, right? And it's I think maybe it is also my belief in God, and that I believe that I'm meant to be here for whatever reason. That I just see it as like the sideshow, but and I don't like to promote doom and gloom on the podcast, and I know that's not what you're about at all. It's just it is true though, right? Like you see what these people are doing, and I think it lends like so much credence to a lot of your perspectives in that it just feels blatantly inhuman, anti-human. Yeah, like AI to me, just it feels like alien technology, and what we have with OpenAI, you better believe they had like 50 years ago. You know what I mean? So what they actually have, I actually want to do an episode because my understanding is there's a group that's actively making a simulation of the entire planet. They're taking all data points of banking, social media, all activities, even CCTV, and then they're making predictive models, right? And that's just what we know about. And then just their agenda, like what they're doing with kids, that they're flooding all of the Western nations with mass immigration. Everything just seems to be anti-human. And with COVID, at least they got a majority on board, at least in here in Canada. I am enough bought in, but a lot of these stuff like the, central bank digital currency, cashless society, even immigration on the left, right? Most people don't even want this. So I feel like there has to be an event or multiple events that will lead to people begging for their own enslavement, because that seems to be the motif, right? It's like they want you to actually beg for it, right? They don't want to just force it on you. I don't know if it's an efficiency thing or it's like a psycho thing, I don't know what it is, but it seems very anti-human, and at least at this juncture I just don't see a lot of what they're pushing, you know getting the buy-in. So do you think something will shift? Do you think they are, because it also feels desperate too. So like, what do you think in terms of future predictions? Do you see something leading to people eventually begging for the next level of like govern me harder daddy stuff? Or because I just don't see it.
Yeah, well, see, each step of the way, every time they try something, it acts as a catalyst for awakening. But not just catalyst for awakening, laterally, because some people do buy into it. So what happens every single time this happens is a polarization of the population into those who buy into it even more and those who reject it even more, you see? And so as we go forward and they keep trying these things, there's going to be increasing levels of division.
Yeah.
And that's why initially it was merely back in the old days, like 10 years ago, it was merely a political discussion, a political debate. But then now, as we're seeing right now, we're actually involved in the lawfare stage of things, where there are furious legal battles being waged between one side and another. And what's that one saying? How it progresses from soapbox to ballot box to jury box to bullet box. That four-stage sequence of things is typically how things progress, right? So right now we're at the jury box stage of it, and there's only one more stage left. And so that's why I'm saying there's a very dangerous potential for things to turn violent at some point, between authoritarian repression and people having to do what's necessary to counter that, unless, like I said, things get diffused at an early stage. And I think, unfortunately, we're so late in the game that the only way that it can really be diffused, even having a hope of being diffused in a peaceful way, is through allies in government, in the military, who have the power to shut it down at their level. Because if the people try to shut it down from our level versus the authoritarians, that's going to lead to clashing. That's going to lead to, as we've seen, for example, in Germany, France, Netherlands, with the farmers protesting right against the Great Reset agenda. These farmers, they do what they do up to a certain point, and then the government sends in thousands and thousands of police. And if that doesn't work, then eventually they send in the military. See, everything always ends in force, because force is final. Force is what settles things in the end. I mean, when people do lawsuits, right, when they engage in lawfare, the only reason why the lawfare even matters, fining people, putting them in jail or whatever, is because there's force behind it. If you don't pay your fine, people with guns take you, put you in jail, right? It always comes back to force. And so that's why either you will have to try to win on the force front, or you have to try to win before that. And hopefully we can. And if there is any element within the government, within the military, that has the ability to put an end to this, it has to be with the consent and the will of the people. And I do think that that's why the Great Awakening has also been a cultural, political movement that has been built up ever since 2016, 2018, that time frame. It's been really ramping up since that time. I mean, earlier it was like you got the Tea Party, and you can go back in time to Ron Paul and so on. But it's been building up more and more over time, I think, to create a populist base that can support an element within authority to take things on at their level, which I think is the only way to really diffuse the situation before it spirals into actual civil war, which we don't want, because it's more horrible than people can imagine. I mean, there's a movie coming about it now, but even that's just Hollywood. It's
yeah, I'm excited to see it. It actually looks fairly entertaining. I always try to watch movies of that caliber to see what they're trying to imprint. And
right.
the Leave the World Behind, I watched that movie several times. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, I mean, for me, like, I'd rather live in America than Canada, especially with a lot of the tyranny that they're pushing in. Yeah, Grumblefish in the comments here. Bill 63 in Canada. I don't know if you've heard. They basically want to make it like life in prison. So rapists, murderers, and the worst in Canada get like 8 months in prison, and then
Right.
like time served. They want to give it a life sentence for anybody who not only commits a hate crime on social media, but if I think that you could lead me to commit a hate crime in the future, that they want to put an ankle bracelet on you, and this, I'm actually excited they're pushing this through, because I think this will finally wake up Canadians in that they just, exactly as you said, like when the more they push further, the more it changes the equation, right? Like if they're modeling in a simulation, like each time you screw one person over, that person wakes up, and changes their life and actions forever, right? And I don't know if even with their model they can predict that, but yeah, I really hope it doesn't come to like full on conflicts, right? But it does feel like that. Maybe it's just the social media, because that seems to be their biggest control mechanism, is the digital screens, right?
Hmm.
Like when I turn off the screens, I live in like peaceful nature and everything's fine. All my neighbors are amazing, you know. But then when I turn on the screen, it's absolute chaos. So at the same time, I wonder, maybe things aren't nearly as bad as we're being led to believe, right? Like we're getting kind of baited down this path of, everything's just on the precipice, it's just
Hmm.
ready to collapse. I don't know, but
Well, I mean, they're certainly hyping up certain aspects of it, to use as a form of psychological warfare to weigh people down, to ruin their morale. I mean, it's a typical psychological warfare ploy, right? Because like in wartime in the past, they would have like fake radio broadcasts, saying the Germans were losing even though they weren't at the time,
yeah,
that sort of thing. Well, all the lessons from prior wars, from even the communist revolutions, they're applying it now, having learned the lessons of history, and that they're trying to use the same formulas now. But things have changed due to the internet, and I mean, even with Elon buying Twitter, for example, that created like a gap, because as much smack as people want to talk about Elon or who he actually is or what his true agenda is, the fact is you can go on Twitter X right now and watch videos that would not have been allowed even 5 years ago.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so information is, the spigot has been turned on a little bit for that, and it's assisting this populist movement. Now, of course, then the question is, well, what is the ultimate purpose of this populist uprising? Is it merely to get people get first world nations to tear each other apart through populist resentment against their own governments? Is that what the reason is, or is there an actual positive component to it? And personally, I think it's both. I think that they're playing a gamble. They're definitely gambling with the future, in that um, they want to harness populist anger in order to create a civil war type situation, which then they can reform in their own image.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And like what they typically do with a nation building and color revolutions and so on. I mean, that's what they're trying to engineer. But that is also the thing that you need if you want to reform things in a better way. So in order for us to buck the status quo, to actually have the return of justice and the rule of law,
Mm-hmm.
you have to tear down the old corrupt order. And so if they want to wage a color revolution, if they want to have um, disruption to create chaos, which they can remold, well, we can also remold that in a positive image. So I think
Yeah,
that's the sort of gamble being played. That things are going to dissolve. They're going to dissolve more fluid, more yeah, definitely more influx. But then it can go either way. So that's why earlier when I said that humanity is at a fork in the road, it's because it can go a very positive direction or a very negative direction. But really, there's no in between anymore.
yeah, yeah, man. Yeah, it just feels like every day, like high stakes poker, And I just
Hmm.
see the insanity. I'm like, that's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out. And yeah, I don't think politics is the answer. I think it's the modern day Coliseum, and I think a lot of the people they're putting forward now as the alternative media are, it feels like a limited hangout to me, but I think it at least is a barometer that we're seeing things improve, people becoming more aware slowly. It does feel like they're being corralled into a certain view, You know, most of that's like just vote Republican, you know, but I think that spell's starting to break. But I think if people got out of the political, I don't see politics as a solution. I just see a mass awakenings, and I think we just have to form our own communities, right?
Hmm.
That's what we're doing here. I meet like-minded people close to me that I trust, and we grow food and we help each other. I don't think it has to be that tough, and it's the life I want to live anyways. But I'm also optimistic that, you know, just the caliber of people in the military, like everybody's sick, fat, and unhealthy and incompetent and being dumped. So like all of their programs to like dumb down and sicken the population, I think could turn against them when they, try to call those people forward, especially here in Canada. Like our military's a total joke. So like I feel like they almost need the robots to do it, because there's not even anybody to really execute their agenda.
Yeah. So that's what they're hinging on, and that's why in the meantime, until they can spin up the humanoid robots, at least in the U.S. and elsewhere, they're importing a lot of migrants who are not just migrants, and a lot of them are actually from gangs, from prisons way down south, who
Yeah.
have no allegiance, have no allegiance to the American people, and so some of these politicians want them to come here, and are going to be offering them citizenship in exchange for military service. So they get them into the military, hand them guns, hand them the power,
Yeah.
and then what, right? And then use them until they can get the humanoids robots spun up. So that's what they want,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it's going to happen, because thankfully we still have the internet. Thankfully we still have the ability to communicate with each other, gather information, organize, and so on. And so that's why there is a counter movement to this. That's why, like, as we said so many times today, every time they try something and it gets exposed, it creates a counter reaction and kind of propels people into an even higher level of awareness and vigilance, which is what you need if you want to reform things in a positive direction.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Man, yeah, it's very interesting times. Actually, the exponential increase in craziness is another, I think, check mark on the side of the simulation theory for me, because it seems like there's this exponential awakening and exponential just general insanity. It almost feels like if we are in a simulation, they like somebody kicked the CPU or something, and it's just like, what I mean, caught in like a bad loop. But I'd be curious. I know you speak a lot about the simulation theory, and I'd love to get your approach, and how you see things, and how you think it ties into the nature of reality. Like, so for me, when we look into quantum physics and such, I think this is just pointing to the fact that, the physical world doesn't really exist, and that consciousness is fundamental to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I, read about astral projection, to me, this just seems like the multiverse, which is just, they're simulating endlessly, and we're going into higher realms of existence. And then, I want to get into NDEs a bit too. When we read a lot of NDE stories, most are like, oh, these beings were great. The light is, where I need to be, and I need to come back here to learn some lessons. But about 10% of them basically show manipulation, and even reptilians and aliens telling them, basically using like Machiavellianism to convince them to come back again and again and again. And putting all this together, to me, it seems like this is a form of a energy harvesting system, or simulation, right? When we peer into the nature of matter, it doesn't exist. We see that consciousness impacts matter and this simulation to an extent, right? We talked about that on Twitter, actually. But, like, put this all together for us. And how do you see, this concept of simulation, and how does that relate to what you know about, alien disinformation and all of that?
Okay. Yeah. So when we talk about simulation, we're not necessarily talking about an actual hardware computer somewhere in the distant future, or in some alien planet that's simulating this. We don't necessarily mean that, like a digital thing that we're in. All we really mean is that things aren't as they appear, number one. And two, that this reality has a very programmed aspect to it. There's programming behind it. And of course there is, because if you look at just physical reality in itself, what do we have? We have relatively hard physics rules. We have the constants of nature, like the speed of light or the gravitational constant or the electric constant. When you write a program, you start out by declaring your constants. What are the values you're going to use throughout your program? And as long as a program runs, these things are set in stone. Those are constants, okay? And likewise, we have the speed of light, which is supposedly a constant. So it's kind of weird that reality functions in many ways like a computer program. We got that. We've got a very strong persistence to this reality, right? So, for example, you go to sleep, you wake up, and the world as you know it is still there. Like your bed didn't disappear just because you weren't conscious of being in bed. So there's a persistence to this, unlike a dream where things tend to be a little more shifty. Because, well, the reason why that is because I think waking reality is being simulated, but it's being simulated on consciousness itself. So I do think that there's a universal field of consciousness, which is all there is. And within that, you can have a programmed aspect that creates the illusion of a physical reality, even though it's not actually real. And we actually do have an example of that in our own nightly dreams, where, yes, despite dreams having symbolic elements and even like spiritual components to it, when you're in a dream and you're walking, let's say, across a road, what is it that is responsible for the gravity? What keeps you from falling through the road due to the lack of gravity? Well, there's an aspect of your subconscious that is upholding dream physics. It's generating physics in a dream, but it's not perfect because if you put your hand up against a wall in a dream and you kind of like relax and push against it, you can start going through the wall because your subconscious gives way and that programming starts to give way, and the physics starts to dissolve in a dream. But it doesn't in waking reality, as far as we know, to the average person, because there is an even stronger subconscious, which the ancients would call the demiurge, which seems to be upholding this illusion. Okay. Now, if you're extremely psychic, you've got telekinetic abilities, or you're one of those super psychic children of China, which has been written about, if you're one of those, then you can treat waking reality almost like a dream too. You can take, the Chinese Somatic Journal of Science, or what was it called? Anyway, so in the early 80s, there was a lot of parapsychology research in China that was done. And because China was so big and they had such a totalitarian surveillance ability of the population, they could pick out people who were psychic, people that were reported to be psychic, and pull them in and test them. And some of these people were able to, for example, take like a sealed glass bottle, take an object like a pill or like a pin or some sort of plastic object, and insert it into the bottle without breaking the glass. In other words, almost like shifting it through the fourth dimension into the inside of the bottle. They could do that. Some of them could take like a tennis ball and turn it inside out without breaking the tennis ball, like inverting it through the fourth dimension. So these people, they had abilities to treat waking reality as if it were a dream, because they were plugged into the simulation, you could say, or the demiurge, and they're able to work at that deep level that is responsible for upholding reality and kind of bypass the rules of this program, right? So what I'm saying is that our dreams and waking reality are very similar. They're both generated by consciousness, just that in our dreams, there's a lot less persistence and constants and, hardness to the rules that make up our dream. Whereas waking reality is very persistent. It's very programmed. It's very, what did Einstein say? That reality is an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. That was a quote attributed to him. But the thing is that certain people do have the ability to alter even waking reality, which shows to me that waking reality is indeed driven ultimately by consciousness. It's just more set in place. So the physicists who want to say that consciousness is a product of matter, I mean, they're wrong, because there's so many counterexamples to that. Telekinesis, the ability to do impossible things like the super psychic children in China, or even synchronicities. When you get synchronicities, how can physics even account for that? It can't. Like, why would consciousness, your subconscious, send you a message through an external object or an external event? How does that even work? Yeah. And even quantum physics would have a hard time explaining that. I mean, quantum physics is the closest physics ever gets to metaphysics and consciousness. And even then, a lot of physicists nowadays, they want to say that quantum physics has nothing to do with consciousness. It's all just wave functions that decohere into the environment. That's the term they use, decoherence. But they don't know what they're talking about. All right, I got a physics background. I can see where they're going wrong. when they talk about wave functions decohering, all they're ultimately saying is that whatever the wave function interacts with in the environment, could be you, could be the sun, could be the earth, whatever, it becomes part of that quantum system. And in the end, even if the entire universe, entangles and what wave function decoheres into, in the end, your consciousness is what has to observe it and make that final call to turn an amorphous wave function into a set reality.
Yeah.
So no matter what the chain is, at the very end of it, there always has to be a conscious observer to make that, that final flip over into an experienced reality. So consciousness is fundamental, and reality, if you want to call it a simulation, you're only calling it a simulation in a functional sense, not in an actual sense.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It's only functionally a simulation because of the way that it behaves, because of its programming. And it's programming because it's not only very set in its ways, but it can be undone. You can have exceptions to it if you have the programmer ability. So if you can program the program, you can undo the program. That's essentially what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Now, and then you asked about like how that ties into, well, one other element to it then is that reality not only has this programmed component to it, but there's also another component which is a more dreamlike aspect. And I kind of hinted at that when I mentioned synchronicity. You see, when a synchronicity happens, it is a sign that something beyond physics, beyond the program, has leaked into it. You see, something numinous, symbolic, meaning-oriented, something spiritual has altered the program itself, has kind of poked itself into it in order to reach you, to send you a message. That's what synchronicity ultimately means. It's a violation of physics, a violation of probability, in order at the behest of something that is beyond physics, beyond quantum physics, beyond the whole program part of it. And so what that speaks to then is that all of existence, right? Only part of it is programmed into the reality that we know. And outside of that, there's another aspect of reality that is way more fluid, way more conscious oriented, meaning symbol oriented, where there's just conscious energies and so on. And that's what in occultism we would call the astral plane, or just the non-physical planes outside of physicality. So the analogy that I like to use is that the totality of consciousness, it's a lot like water. Imagine it's all liquid water, right? But then part of it gets frozen. So you get this block of ice in an otherwise field of water. And so the ice itself is very rigid. If you're in there, nothing really moves as far as we know. And that's what physics is. That's what physical reality is. But there's also all this liquid water around it that can, be mutable, that entities can exist in, that we enter into when we go out of body or when we die. When we leave the physical world, we enter back into a liquid state, into the state of pure fluid consciousness. Whereas when we incarnate, we're incarnating into the block of ice. And now we've got a physical body made of frozen consciousness, made of matter, energy, space, and time. And so, yeah, that's how I sort of view reality, that there are two aspects to it, the programmed frozen ice aspect, and then the more fluid, symbolic, conscious, synchronistic, astral level to it. And the consciousness is like the superset, and the ice is merely the subset of it. And that's why we can have psychics. That's why we can have aliens violating the laws of physics as we know them, is because they're operating not by the rules of ice, but by the rules of water, by the rules of consciousness that's able to undo ice, that's able to shift in ways that ice cannot. So that's how I view it. And as far as the alien agenda goes, I think for the most part, other than the alien ability to make use of non-ice abilities and technologies, I think for the most part, they're just looking out for their own selves, for the physical, biological, tactical, military applications of Earth and humanity and so on. I think that's ultimately what they're going for. So.
Yeah, and we have Grumblefish here in the chat. I'll ask his question.
Sure.
You see, ask if Tom thinks this is a closed system or if there's finite universes. I think you pretty much answered that, but and then he also asked about flat Earth. Oh God.
Yeah. Well, okay. No, I'll just quickly address those. So if this is a closed system, I think it's only a closed system if you operate strictly by closed means. So, for example, if you were to get into a spaceship, right, and you were to go in that direction forever and ever and ever, I think eventually you come back from the other side because it's like a hypersphere. When you go around a sphere, you come back from the other side. So I think it's a closed universe in that sense. However, you don't need to get in a spaceship and go over there to leave this universe. You just need to lie down, go astral, go out of your body, and now you're beyond this physical universe, right? So then you're moving this way into the fourth dimension rather than this way through the third dimension. So it's all about what degree, what axis you're moving through that defines whether a system is open or closed. But even with that, of course, this universe is an open system in an energetic sense, because as a human being, you might be made of matter, energy, space, and time, but you have another influence coming down from above, from a higher dimension,
Mm-hmm.
that allows you to be conscious, to be sentient, to do things that your programming didn't program you to do. See, it's the presence of free will and non-determinism that shows, that proves that you are more than the sum of your physical parts. So we're an open system in that sense. We have something coming in from the outside that has a negentropic influence. And negentropic just means it goes against the um, statistical quantum deterministic flow of matter and energy, which normally evolves towards heat death and disintegration and kind of everything kind of evening out. Life, the very definition of life is that it is against that. It is ordering. It tends towards order instead of disorder. Life is always evolving and ordering and moving up in complexity. And that goes against the tendency of matter, which is to ultimately, disintegrate and disaggregate into a entropic heat death kind of state. So the fact that negentropy can even exist shows that, yes, the universe is an open system, but in a very subtle kind of way. And as far as flat Earth, personally, I don't believe it, just because me knowing enough physics, geometry, astronomy, and so on, I'm just aware of too many counterexamples to that. I will say that I like to joke, I've said this on previous podcasts, that I'm more of a fake earther than a flat earther. I do think that I think reality being fake is a more likely thing than Earth itself being flat. Just me.
Well, there you go, Grumblefish. Tom Montalk is disinfo confirmed.
I'm an official globetard. Sorry, yeah. Guys, I'm a globetard.
Yeah, well, when I think about simulation theory, in this concept of consensus reality, I do see a few things. For me, like you see these guys with these P900s and they see like 30 miles. It's like, well, that's kind of interesting. And then also this idea of like a non-vacuum can't exist next to a vacuum. To me, that stands out. But then I just see it as proof of simulation. Like you kind of see what you want to see. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Yeah, well, see, there's an element to it. The problem is, as I mentioned, there's an aspect to reality that is programmed, that has pretty hard rules to it. It's based on geometry, physics, mathematics, and so on. And then there's another element which depends more on consciousness, and that's what quantum physics kind of ties into. Like when the quantum physics talks about the observer influencing the way that a wave function collapses into physical reality, well, yeah, consciousness makes that shot. And earlier when you talked about aliens, for example, and how it's possible that we perceive them differently depending on who we are because they're projecting something and it kind of interacts with our consciousness, I do think that applies to certain types of entities, okay? Now, an important point on that is that when a person is clairvoyant or when they go out of body, when you're observing a non-physical being like a ghost or some higher dimensional entity, because the entity and the ghost is not physical, you don't have any five sense perceptions in order to see it as it is. So the only way that you perceive it is through a part of your mind or your subconscious decoding or rendering their energy field into something that you can recognize.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have a higher, like, let's say an angelic being come down, okay, your mind, you're probably going to perceive it as like a female figure that's glowing with white, warm, golden energy, something like that. You're going to perceive that because that's how your subconscious is decoding that energy field. And so if you have another person next to you who's also psychic or out of body and can see that exact same angelic being, they might say, oh, I see a being that's glowing with the blue light and has wings. And you might say, oh, no, it's golden and it doesn't have wings. It has a robe, like a nice flowing white silken robe. Well, that's how your respective subconsciouses are decoding that energy. Okay. And that only works because you're dealing with a non-physical being that doesn't have physical form. However, if an alien is projecting into our 3D physical reality with a biological body and a physical vessel, at that point, you're going to see something that is objective, right? So the person next to you is going to see the same being that you are if it is an actual physical being, right? So that's what I'm trying to say is physicality, the whole idea behind physicality is that we have shared experiences, that we have a common thing that we agree on, and that creates the illusion of objectivity. Yeah. Just the idea that all of our minds, it's kind of like with a massive online multiplayer game, you have all these different computers hooked up to a central server, and the central server is coordinating their various instances of the game into a shared game environment. And I do think that our waking reality is exactly the same thing, where you have a central coordinating higher universal intelligence that is coordinating our own individual realities into the illusion of a shared objective reality. And it is what enforces the persistence, the constants, and the physics rules, and everything. And so we think that we live in an objective reality that is independent of us, but it actually isn't. It's just something that our consciousness is plugged into and is being coordinated with others. And the reason why I say that is because there are times where that coordinating mechanism, where it breaks down.
Hmm.
So, for example, in the case of spontaneous human invisibility, what's her name? Donna Higbee,
Okay.
Higbee. She has an article on spontaneous human invisibility, and she has many anecdotes in there of people suddenly becoming invisible to everyone else around them. It's almost like their server connection got disrupted, and so they were just playing in their own instance of the game that wasn't being coordinated with anyone else, so no one else could see them walking around them or even touching them. Like, they weren't consciously responding to it. And I had my own experience with that one time where I went to Walgreens because I had a migraine, and I just needed to get at the medicine down at the end of that aisle so I can just get the heck out of there and get my migraine taken care of. And there were these people that were in the way, and I didn't normally. I would always go around because I'm polite, but in this case, I just said screw it. So I kind of pushed my way back to them, and I got tangled up in their carts and their arms. So their arm, like one guy's arm, was like literally around me like this, and I was trying to get through it, and the problem is they weren't responding to me. It's as if I did not exist to them at all. They were talking with each other as if they were like animatronic robots on a script. And they never once looked at me, gave me any funny looks, interrupted the conversation, nothing. So I moved the carts aside, picked up the guy's arm, moved it off, slapped it onto the other cart, and then finally got my way through them to get at the medicine down at the end of the aisle. And that was the strangest thing I've ever experienced in terms of
Whoa.
everyday weirdness. And I'm not the only one who's had experiences like this. I know others who have also either become invisible or somehow disconnected from the people around them. And what that tells me is that, yeah, you know what? We are probably each experiencing our own instance of the game, of the simulation. It's just that normally there is another intelligence that makes sure that everything gets coordinated nice and smoothly. But the thing is, if you do something very unpredictable, or in my case, my brain waves were probably like fritzing or something like that, and I was doing something improbable at the same time, it can't keep up with that. And then that's when you start getting glitches. And that tells me that, yes, reality isn't what physics says it is. It isn't what mainstream consensus viewpoint is. It's definitely programmed. You could call it a simulation, but it's a simulation within consciousness. And there is something that enforces persistence, but the persistence isn't perfect. It's perfect like 99% of the
Yeah.
times. But that 1% that proves to you that it's more of a, I don't want to say Truman Show, but it's in that direction, you know?
Oh man, yeah. Wow, that's a fascinating story. Actually, yeah, I did hear you speak about that a while ago, and yeah, it's those little glitches in the matrix,
Hmm.
and I
Yeah.
find it is consciousness dependent, like my own consciousness dependent. You know, I started getting into self hypnosis, and when I once I had this experience where, like, I walk into a coffee shop, and two of my exes were like one after the other in line, and they were like they lived far away. They just happened to be in the same coffee shop. I'm like, okay, this
Wow.
is really weird. And then I walked just like half a block, and then there's this girl I went to university with who doesn't live in the city. I hadn't seen her in like 10 years. It's just there, right in front of me. I'm like, okay, weird. Then I walk like another couple blocks, and then I just look into this window, and this like family friends I hadn't seen in 20 years. They're
Wow.
all just looking out the window as I'm looking. Their whole family, and they don't live in the city I was in. I was in Toronto. They live like an hour and a half away. They just happen to be there. They're looking at me, and they're like, "Donnie." And then the next morning, I get on the subway, rush hour traffic, and one of the guys, like the subway opens, and he's standing right in the door, of the train and in rush hour, and we both like just jaw dropped. And I've had other times where I've been like in like an office setting where things are going a certain way, like aggression. You can feel this tension, and I literally just like relaxed myself and like totally like disconnected emotionally. And then I've seen people like switch, like what happened never happened before. Like it almost like this the quantum jumping. I've experienced many things like that where people's actions will totally switch, and like the whole like the trajectory of where things were going just totally instantly changed based off consciousness. Do
Hmm.
you think yeah, do you like how much of it do you think is consciousness dependent? Because to me, like my actual vibe and state, it's undeniable. Like if I'm having a bad couple days, like everything just goes wrong externally. Like a deal
Right.
doesn't come in or somebody's mad at me, and then if I'm like at a high vibe state, things just come to me. Like
Hmm.
like awesome people start reaching out. I don't know. Like yeah, what is the role of your personal consciousness and your vibe, if you will, in terms of impacting the simulation?
Yeah, well, it's definitely fundamental. I mean, obviously there are aspects of our life that are independent of our consciousness because they are hard coded into the physics of things, right? Like if I were to drop this glass, it's going to drop regardless of my vibe because that's physics. So certain things are hard coded, but then certain things are not. And to go back to the water and ice analogy, imagine if the block of ice was more like icebergs, and all icebergs for the most part are solid, but there's like little gaps between them where there's water. So the entire iceberg can shift a little bit relative to other icebergs. And what that means is that physical reality tries to be as plausible as it can be, tries to be as ordinary as it normally can be. But then there are times where it fractures
Hmm.
and you get slippage. You get slippage between elements of it, right? So for example, when you were seeing your two exes standing in line and those people that you knew in the window, for
Yeah.
example, in between those two events, you had a relatively plausible physical thing like, okay, you're walking from one point to another point and nothing weird is happening, everything's ordinary. But then that weird thing happens. So you get ordinariness punctuated by weirdness, here and there. And that's what life generally is. Life for most people is quite ordinary. It's not like, you're constantly living in Lord of the Rings where everything is magical. You're living in 3D reality, Earth, 2024, where things are relatively normal, but you get these time periods
Yeah.
where things get weird, right? And then those are the exceptions. Those are the counterexamples to the otherwise hypnotic trance that reality is just boring, cold, mechanical universe. And we have to remember that. We have to remember the anomalies, because anomalies, every anomaly is a portal to a greater reality. It's a chink in the facade. It's a crack in the facade of the illusion. And
Yeah.
so it helps to either, if you have a good memory, just to remember them or to write them down. So anytime you start feeling kind of too trapped in 3D reality, too down, just look at that list again, and you kind of start remembering how, oh yeah, that's right, reality can get pretty weird. And if you have a lot of experience with manifesting, for example, it's easy. The hardest thing about manifesting is remembering that it even exists as a thing, because it's very easy to slip into a 3D mindset where you kind of forget that that's even a thing. You kind of get too wrapped up in problems and issues and current events or whatever, the whole like 3D aspect of things. But you have to remember that consciousness is primary and it can shine through the cracks of the prison walls, so to speak. And you can leverage it. If you know how to apply it, you can leverage it to change things for your own life in a very positive, macro kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be curious to like. I always wonder the limits of it too, right? And yeah,
Mhm.
your earlier point there, right? It's like those little chinks that show that hey, this reality isn't really what we think it is, right? It's like other than that, everything's normal except the times when it's very obvious that we're basically living a simulation. It kind
Yeah.
of wakes you up. And maybe everybody are having these events. They're just not as you said conscious to it. Or maybe it is if when you get on a higher vibration, if you will, or more conscious. What do you think of the whole? I know you wrote a book on it, basically, but on like this whole NPC phenomenon. Do you think that a portion of people in this plane are literal NPCs, or is it like figurative? Because
Oh,
it
see, here's the
seems like it
thing.
is.
Right. Hmm. Yeah, and so I'm not the only source that has said it. And the whole NPC phenomenon, that's a more recent cultural phenomenon. But even the Gnostics 2,000 years ago said the same thing. They called certain people hylics as opposed to psychics or pneumatics. So they divided the human population into three different levels. You got the ones at the very bottom who are just material oriented, and like Hinduism has the same thing. They've got a whole term for people that are strictly 100% 3D material oriented. They're almost like animalistic in nature. You have that, and you can interpret the Old Testament in certain ways, like with pre-Adamic humans to Boris Moraviev. He wrote the three Gnosis books. In those three books, he talks about what are essentially pre-Adamic humans, who are humans who have a soul, but they don't have a higher God spark or a higher spirit. And that's pretty much how the Gnostics define them as well. Uh, it's a recurring theme. I mean, Rudolf Steiner said it, Gurdjieff in his own way said it, John Baines said it. So it's one of those mystery school truths, or one of those esoteric principles that has always been around. People have always noticed it, but you don't want to popularize that idea, because if it gets too popular, then too many people get too witch hunty about it. You know, it can turn into a witch hunt where you don't know who's who, and you get paranoid and you start burning people at the stake because you think they're NPCs when they're actually not, and vice versa.
Yeah.
But the fact that that theory can be misused like that doesn't disprove it wrong. It doesn't disprove the fact that it might actually be that you can have people who are driven by something other than a higher divine spirit. I mean, sure, everything is consciousness. You know, even a rock has divine energy to a degree, but not in a functional expression. It doesn't have a God spark that decides its actions for it. You know, a rock just sits there, it gets kicked around, it gets crushed, gets weathered by the the rain and the wind. Unlike a human being who has free will and agency, ideally, who can choose to do good, who can
Yeah.
choose to fight good, who can choose to turn the environment around and make something better of Earth. And so, why is it that some people have that and other people have the opposite? Other people have almost like a demonic impulse to destroy other people's lives and their own lives and the earth and the environment and animals and whatever. Is it just because they were traumatized and abused? And I would say in some cases, well, maybe, but I think there are also cases where even as kids, there's something really wrong with them, something
Yeah.
empty, demonic, or just they got nothing higher in them. And I've known certain people in my life, personal life, who they never once showed any trait of having spirit whatsoever. No symbolic
Yeah.
dreams, no synchronicities, no creativity, no interest in anything higher other than being a sociopathic manipulator.
Yep. Yep.
What does that mean, right? And Rudolf Steiner, Rudolf Steiner, he had a lot of interesting things to say. He said in a private faculty meeting to his faculty that, yeah, certain people, their souls are elemental souls. They're not even human souls. They're elementals. Well, so in his case, I don't want to get into fully what elementals are, but basically it's just like a lower non-physical life form. So like the life form energy that drives, water and plants and so on, like a lower evolution. Somehow that is what's piloting a human body. And if that were the case, then you wouldn't expect that person to reincarnate, to have any sort of karma or destiny. Because, see, karma and destiny, those two things depend on you having continuation beyond this life and having had past lives.
Mm-hmm.
See, because that gives you a goal to evolve towards. But if it's YOLO, if you only live once, then you're not going to care about any of that, and you're going to live a YOLO life because that's all you are. And maybe that explains that phenomenon. Maybe.
Man, yeah, well said. And I agree. It's not something I like to talk about often because it could lead to like crazy discrimination if that actually caught on. But it's been my experience. Like I worked in the, pretty high up in the business world, and like everybody I came in contact with was like sociopathic. And not everybody, but a lot of people. Like I had 4 managers that were like basically psychopaths, and the more I'm on this planet, I just see a lot of people. I don't even want to call them sheep. Like I don't care if like a lot of people just call like people who are left wing, all NPCs or sheeple. I think just the inability to question anything whatsoever, and exactly as you said, like it feels like there's a large portion of the people that are just reinforcing the consensus. Like that's their only role, is to like just do whatever the consensus is that yeah.
Yeah, and funny enough, when you have a massive online multiplayer game, there are NPCs programmed into it in order to sustain the game narrative. Because if it's nothing but players, then the game masters or the programmers can't control the narrative of the game if there has to be one, right? So there's always these NPCs that populate and pad out the game to kind of offset, to buffer against the independent free will actions of the players. So it's kind of weird how reality kind of seems to mirror that in many ways.
Oh, for sure. But also on the alien front, you see this concept. A lot of people talk about human cloning centers, and also like Westworld type vibes going on in the world. Like, do you think there also could be either aliens or cloned programmed MK Ultra people, actually being put into the population somehow as like a weird human replacement situation. Like, yeah, what do you think of
Yeah,
that?
well, see, I mean, even just on theoretical grounds, there's nothing technically or morally limiting these kinds of forces from doing that. The technology is there.
Yeah.
They can do it. I mean, they cloned sheep, for example, like Dolly back in the 90s. They cloned it. And the only reason why we don't hear more about that is because, oh, it's unethical. It's been, uh, discouraged or even outlawed in some cases. But these black programs, they don't operate by our surface laws. So they've probably been doing it for decades in their own ways. And there might have been some technical limitations to, you can create a clone, but can you get a soul to occupy that body? Can you get a spirit to occupy the body? And maybe you can't, but you can still have a basic low-level soul that can operate it. And I think those are technical limitations that they've probably overcome. So you got that, and then you've got things like the whole hybrid breeding program agenda within the UFO abduction field. There are just so many different cases of indicating that gray aliens with whatever controls them has been hybridizing humans with these gray aliens to create a large class of hybrids that are intended to replace our leadership at some point in the future. That doesn't mean it's going to succeed or that they're going to pull it off, but that's what they've been doing for many, many, many decades. And there are many abductees and contactees who have been clued into that happening. And so I just wanted to say on that if that were to happen, most likely it would happen through a lot of the disruptions to society that we mentioned earlier. Could be an EMP attack, cyber attack, some sort of mass global collapse or something like that. But during that time period, it's very easy for hybrids to be slipped into the population en masse to, I don't know, like let's say set up safe zones or green zones, like 15-minute safe cities or something that the survivors then flock into to survive, but then now they're under the control of something that is under the control of aliens, right? So I think all these different factions, they got their own agendas, their own machinations of how they really want to go about things. And we have to keep in mind that just because they're doing it, that doesn't mean that that's the only agenda or that it's the ultimate agenda or that it's the one that's going to succeed. It's just one of many agendas, some more positive, There's also divine agendas. I do believe in positive aliens, but I don't believe that positive aliens are necessarily the ones that are cartoonishly caricaturized in the channeling and New Age movements, like necessarily like the Galactic Federation of Light or Commander Ashtar, some of the Palladian or Arcturian stuff. I think a lot of that is kind of hokey. It's based on it's not only based on wishful thinking sometimes, but also actual like astral parasites like demons and even gray aliens getting in there and seeding this false view of positive aliens that they can manage, that they can use for their own purposes, right? And meanwhile, the actual true positive aliens are off on the side, like shaking their heads at this cartoonish representation of them that's being used, to serve the other side. So I think if positive aliens do exist, they're way more low-key, more mature, and more discreet about how they go about things. And they don't demand our worship. They don't demand us to be constantly aware of them and thinking of them and so on. That they want us to be free, to be smart, to be discerning, and to ultimately do our own thing and kind of step into our destiny instead of coming under the dependent worship towards these positive beings. So they want to stay out of the way but help us catalyze our evolution. And that's how I view them, more so than this like New Age hyped up fantasy based Fabio in space kind of thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, do you think there is a certain mass medical procedure that could be promoting that many people took into their bodies in the last few years or continue to take, that may be promoting a type of hybridization or genetic mutation or mental control hardware?
Yeah, well, see, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm not saying I got evidence behind this, but if you look at people like Carrie Madej, for example, and the analysis that she and her team had done on certain samples of the jab, okay, and how it seems to have living properties, like it grew up and like started moving off the plate of the little glass slide that they're looking at under the microscope. There's something, I mean, it might be synthetic biology. It could be, for all I know, gray alien genetics or biological samples that they put into those things. Because if you can insert gray genetics into humanity, you're going to make them way more cybernetic and controllable by your means, because that gray aliens, for the most part, they're like servile,
Yeah.
low rung worker bots. So if you hybridize humans with that, those are the qualities that are going to be impressed into us. And I think it's possible that the jabs could be used for that. Now, it doesn't mean that that's what it was, but I'm saying it could. I will say one more thing though, that it seems to me that there were different batches of the jabs, and some of them were uh, placebos. Some of them had the actual active component. The other ones had some other active component. I think they're doing testing because not enough people have been affected by it for it to be the one true agenda behind the jab, right? So I think they were doing like testing for the most part. And if they're doing testing, then that implies to me that in the future they're going to roll out the real thing, the thing that accomplished for them what they think, had the most success during this trial run. I think in the future they will try to do that, but I don't think that'll really come around until a possible collapse of society. Like in order to gain entry to these green zones, these safe cities, you have to take a jab, and when you do, it kind of interfaces you with the local 5G or 6G network they got going on there in order to create like a slave class that they can herd into these cities and use as a feudalistic serf class to serve their transhumanist cyborg society. That sounds so crazy, but
Dude,
yeah.
love it. Man, I'll talk to you offline about this. I actually was playing around with AI, and I used your website as a prompt, and I made a sci-fi novel.
Wow.
And yeah, some of the themes you're talking about were like in the novel. I'll see if I still have it. It's kind of fun. But I'd love to transition just in the last minutes we have with you about solutions. So for me, and this is a multi-layered thing, right? So for me, level 1 is become independent, out of debt, live the life you want to live, be healthy, grow your own food, be independent, right? Level 2 is just kind of practicing gratitude, being more present, but I would be curious about your approach in terms of, what do you recommend for people in this time, and also I wonder if we could create like just kind of like even like a mass meditation or intention. Like, do you think that would change the world? But yeah, maybe Tom, you could walk us through, for the listeners, things people can do to maybe help the situation and themselves, because it is a dark time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it starts with yourself, of course, because you can't help people from a position of weakness or poverty. So the more you power yourself up in terms of knowledge, in terms of financial resources, in terms of your energy and just who you are, stepping into your truer potential, being more yourself, being more embodied here. The more you do that, the more capable you become of helping others. So you have to help yourself before you're able to truly help others. And so that's why you have to start with where you are right now and assess everything about yourself that is holding you back. Your commitments, your values, the things that you're into, the things that you're spending most of your time on, like arguing on social media or doing nothing but watching news all day, trying to keep abreast of current events. There's a lot of things that are actually, they are addictions in the guise of awakening. See, people think that they're becoming more awakened by keeping track of political happenings or current events, but the problem is you might be winning in a 3D level in terms of, I'm becoming more politically aware, but you might be losing on a 4D spiritual level in terms of, I'm also getting demoralized. I'm also becoming more bitter and cynical, right? So you have to become aware of the bigger picture and prioritize. So you have to prioritize that which matters most to your well-being and to the well-being of those that are under your care, your loved ones. And essentially, you have to build a home base within yourself, like your own little castle, your spiritual castle within you, that is unassailable from the psychological warfare, the 5th generation warfare that is being waged upon us from the outside through, all the programming and the bad news and the antagonism online. There's human and non-human forces that do nothing but dedicate their time towards demoralizing people and creating division, right? So the more you play into the division, like I'm talking about false division, not like the true division between like higher spirit and matter, or between true goodness and true evil. I mean more like stupid division, like pro climate change versus like, oh no, climate change is a scam or something like that. Those little political dichotomies that people get sucked into, you want to kind of pull back from that a bit And you definitely want to find the things in life that that recharge you, right? Because if you're like an electric car and you got no charging port, you're going to run out of juice. So you have to find the things in you that give you energy, morale, clarity, discernment, and just more fulfillment, because those are the things that power you up on the inside in order to attract and to accomplish everything else, whether it's physically becoming financially independent or spiritually attracting financial independence through synchronistic manifesting means by keeping your vibe up. See, it's important to diversify your actions not only to the physical but also to the spiritual, because the spiritual ultimately underpins the physical, right? It shifts the odds in your favor by putting you more under the jurisdiction of your own true destiny and divine forces, and also attracting to yourself success and happiness and smoothness. Because earlier when you mentioned how when your vibes are low and you get people yelling at you and just things kind of turning bad, well, imagine if that were your constant mindset. How much, how successful would you be at becoming financial independent or helping other people or doing anything in life if that is your life? If your vibe is so low that you're constantly interfering with your own destiny, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of like straighten out your mindset and get yourself tuned up internally, and not by denying negative, but by tapping into the actual true objective higher positive that exists. That's the important thing. And then from there, then you have the energy, you have the clarity, you have the inner intuition and guidance that you need in order to take physical action, whatever that may be. Like in your case, you moved out to the rural area. That's a very good, smart move. Some other people, they might be in a bind where they can't do that, but there's other things they can do, or maybe they need to be in a city for whatever reason. Maybe in the future they'll, I don't know, be an important heading up an orphanage or something in a post-war situation or something. You don't know what their individual destiny is. See, we all have our different destinies, our different paths in life, but in order for us to enact any of these, we have to be ourselves. And we can't be ourselves if we're extremely beaten down, demoralized, drained, and so on, right? So that's why I say the fundamentals is to get in touch with your true intuition, what you truly feel. And you can do that with like what I like to do is I like to get a notebook and just kind of like ponder my issues, ask questions, do self-inquiry, because that allows me to kind of get within myself and feel into my problems and my solutions and brainstorm ideas and then analyze it logically. So that's what I do, but other people love to go for walks, other people love to meditate or dream on it or something like that, or set their intentions. Yeah, so instead of me just saying like, oh yeah, make sure you form like a local political action committee and visit your city council and do things like that. I mean, you can if you want, if that's your path, but that's not the fundamental. I'm talking about the roots here. I'm talking about the spiritual roots that get you powered up, right? So you have to figure out who you are and become more of that, and essentially just bring your higher spirit, your higher destiny, your higher energies down into the physical and express it outwards. So, I mean, essentially, you are a knight to the Lord, your spiritual Lord, whatever that may be. Okay, your higher values, the thing that you came here to do in this life, you have it within you. You feel it, right? And that's the thing that you have to obey, just like a knight obeys the Lord, to go out into the world and fight for it. That's sort of the key.
Wow, man, that's incredible. Oh my God. I've started to get into astral projection. Like I'm hearing a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these guys, just the stories they're talking about, and just the freedom and the lessons these people are learning in the astral, and the idea of it. To me, it seems like it is due to cultivating awareness. I think we all go into the astral every night anyways, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's cultivating awareness to be in it. But I've heard you say that like you caution against any type of astral travel. Yeah, maybe you could speak to that quickly.
So the thing is, where to tackle this? So you're right that when we are asleep at night, especially during stage 4 delta brainwave sleep, according to Rudolf Steiner and many other mystics who had the ability to clairvoyantly see what goes on and observe themselves and see others in that stage, the core of your consciousness, plus your astral body, which is like the energetic vehicle or sheath around it, it leaves the physical body and the etheric life force energy body. It leaves that behind and goes off into another astral realm. Okay. But when it does it in that state, it is in a state of higher consciousness because it's just pure spirit in the astral, unfettered by the ego and the etheric body and the physical body. So it knows what it's doing. It goes off to essentially the same place that it's at in between lifetimes. So the afterlife state, in between lifetimes, that's where your consciousness supposedly goes when you're asleep. Now, some people who remember the state, some of them, they report about this thing called night school, how they go to this other realm and they're taught lessons by higher spiritual beings, and they get review of their day, and they kind of plan their life down here. And then when they wake up again, well, when they go back near the body, then they have dreams that symbolically depict some of the crumbs of that higher night school experience. Okay. Now, the problem is when you intentionally do astral projection, you are in, you're still in your ego. You still have your ego awareness. Okay. So if you like lay down and do astral projection, now you're out of it. You still feel yourself. You're just now floating outside your body. And then if you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go out of my body. I'm gonna go into the astral plane. I'm gonna find some hot astral chick, and we're gonna make out. Right? Something like that.
Yeah.
You're acting under your human ego when you do that, and that contaminates the astral body and the connection that you have. And so your vibe is going to attract beings in that state that you're not going to attract in a normal sleep state where you're up in the spirit realm in your true spirit self. That's the point I'm trying to make. So yeah, so and the thing is, it also depends on who you are. If you're someone who has a lot of negative entity interference, like people, like things trying to take you down. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm the only one, but I do get my fair share of it. If you're someone who's under a lot of occult attack, then astral projecting a lot can be an avenue for them to exploit that. Like I knew someone who was so cocky, he challenged the shadow people to a fight. And then he laid down, and the shadow people came, and they yanked him out of body, and they yanked him almost out the door and down the hall. And who knows what would happen then? He probably would have gotten trapped in some lower astral plane, and he would have died in his sleep, essentially. His heart would have stopped or something, or he would have fallen into a coma, which does happen sometimes.
I saw one of those guys recently. Do
Wow.
you like sorry to interrupt, but I was getting more into like meditation, and I was reading kind of like dark stuff about the occult. All of a sudden I see this like shadow figure, 7 feet tall, walk out of the corner of my eye. And we all hallucinate to an extent. Then I look over, and this towel flicks up, and it was just gone. And I wasn't scared. It was just very obvious it's happening. Like, what do you think that was?
Well, usually shadow people, they can be a number of things. They can be, in some cases, it could be like a cloaked humanoid alien, but usually those are invisible rather than dark. So if you see something dark, a lot of times it's a demonic humanoid entity, or it can be a discarnate human, essentially a ghost that is either earthbound or by choice tries to stick around the earth plane. Or it can also be like interdimensional beings. It depends. It can be a number of things.
Do you still come under attacks, and do you find kind of doing a lot of the practices you laid out will prevent that? Like, do you think it's also a function of vibrational state, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the practices and the theory behind it is sound. I've tested it so many times, and it works.
Okay.
The problem is the discipline and to remember to do it. That is the issue, and that is especially the issue if, for example, let's say you kind of slack on it a little bit, and if you're an abductee, one night you get abducted, and during the abduction, they do a lot of psychic, perhaps even electronic mind programming on you to install post-hypnotic commands deep into your subconscious. And then so the next day when you wake up, you might not have much memory of what happened during the encounter, but you will have like after typical post-abduction symptoms like bruises on your body, marks, and missing time, and a little bit of PTSD and so on if you have that. And then like a couple days later, all of a sudden, boom, this crushing wave of depression gets triggered at a critical moment. It could be before some important decision in life, or some important person you need to connect with, but now you're feeling too depressed to connect with them. That sort of psychological warfare or spiritual warfare that happens, it only happened because you slacked that one moment, which led to an abduction, which implanted something that then got activated later. You can see how complicated it's almost like hackers and how hackers exploit a system. It's kind of like that. And so you might have practices that you do that are very protective, but that one gap, that one missing thing can lead to the implantation of like a ticking time bomb that can then be set off like a week later or a couple days later or something like that. So what I'm saying is, I mean, the practices might work, but you have to keep up on it. And the reason why I'm not like wagging my finger at anyone is because I myself am also fallible in that sense, that I try to keep it up, but there are times where I just forget, or I just slack on it. I think it's almost like I can slack today. It's not a big deal, but that's the one time. That's one time, and then takes me the whole freaking next week or two to deal with the fallout from that, right? So that's yeah.
Wow, man. Wow. Well, Tom, I could talk to you forever. I really want to be respectful of your time. In closing, I would just be curious. We've talked about how crazy things are getting, the let's say possible futures that we have, you know, but at the same time, in all the talks I've heard you give and all your message, I think you very much kind of resonate as I do, that there seems to be a hope, a positivity to an extent. I'd be curious, in closing, where does that come from you? And also, yeah, where do you see the next few years playing out? Are you optimistic? Are you, 50-50? Yeah.
Well, I would consider myself an optimistic doomer, an optimistic doomer. And the reason why I say that is because typically optimism is framed in the sense of like, no, no, not a single bad thing is going to happen. The future is going to be totally peachy, right? Whereas the way I think is more like, okay, we're going to face some pretty serious challenges,
Yes.
but we will make it through, and it's going to catalyze us into an even more positive state, or positive state of civilization than we are now. So I think the outcome, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but the tunnel is dark. That's how I would like to
Yeah.
put it. And and also, I'm not a fatalist. I don't think that the future is singular. I do think that the future is open. And the only reason why I say that is because you can look at your own life. For example, there are times in life where things look probably really dark, really grim. You don't see a solution out, but somehow you made it through. Or other times, some wild card surprise came into your life that kind of helped you out in some way. It could have been a
Yep.
person, could have been an idea, a dream, intuition, or something like that, right? So why wouldn't that also then be true for humanity as a whole? Because we see, based on the news and the scientific trends and economic trends, we see that doom is kind of coming. But as I mentioned earlier, we're not able to see necessarily all the data pointing towards a positive, because a positive doesn't operate by hard data necessarily. It operates by intuition, inspiration, synchronicity, divine guidance, just things spontaneously and organically motivating people to do what they need to do, whether it's organizing or speaking out or being themselves, or not choosing a certain person or another, right? So that's why I'm optimistic, because I do see that whole other side of the picture that counters the deterministic doom trends. So that's why I'm saying that, okay, as dark as things are, I am pretty sure that there are secret forces, surprises, wild cards that will counteract and play upon the black swans that are kind of coming our way, whether it's societal collapse or EMP stuff or financial stuff. No matter what it is that we face, the darker it is, the more of a catalyst it is for the light, right? So that's how I view it. There's always this balance as we go into the future, and yeah, the darker it'll get, the more light there will be at the same time, and uh, and that's why I do think things will work out in the end, because we have good people that are driven by spirit, and spirit is ultimately indomitable, and so therefore, even if the entire world burns down, as long as some part of us survives, we will rebuild under a higher spiritual template.
Wow. And with that, the legendary Tom Montalk, montalk.net. Tom, where can people support you? How can they support you? Yeah, any social links, anything you want to plug?
Yeah, if you just go to montalk.net and you scroll down to the very bottom, I've got all my social links there. I'm on Twitter, well, X. I'm on Telegram. I'm on Gab as well. So all my links are there. Or if you go to Twitter or X or whatever, I mean, I got all my links, either all of those link to the others. You can find me on Amazon as well. I've got 3 books there. I've got my Gnosis book, Fringe Knowledge for Beginners, Discerning Alien Disinformation, and my two Transcending volumes, which is just my website in hard copy form. I've got those on Amazon. I've got them on Lulu as well. So yeah, you can find me. Just do a search on Montauk, and you'll find me.
Awesome, man. That's great. Well, I'm going to say my goodbyes offline to you. And then, guys, those who are on the stream, I'm actually going to pop back on for a few minutes to say some goodbyes. So, yeah, Tom, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining. And hopefully we can have you on again.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me on.
Hey guys, just wanted to do a little post if people are still watching. I see some people in the chat. Hope everybody liked that. I found it super inspiring. Tom has been one of my favorite researchers of all time. Just if you go on his website, you'll find out like he dives into so many topics in such depth, and just also his personality as well. I mean, he's just a really easygoing, really nice person. I find him very inspiring. So, hope you guys felt the same. Um, there's a couple questions here. I'm just going through that we missed. Yeah, is Tom going to stay in the United States? I believe he is. I think he spoke about that on others. He's into some very interesting stuff, so I hope everybody goes and follows him. I'm just going to see if anybody has any other questions for me. I don't know. He says, thanks, guys. A great dive into the breaking of spells. Thank you. Yeah, you've been, you had a lot of great comments in the chat. I want to thank Nicole Page as well. Yeah, she's been on some of the streams, giving some really good insights there. Yeah, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this and what I've been doing so far with the podcast. Of course, I still have a day job, so it's hard to go. I'd love to move full-time to podcasting, but for me, what I'm really trying to do is inspire you. A lot of who I'm interviewing are people who have changed my life for the better, and it's really hard to land a lot of these people as a small podcaster, but so far I think I've done really good, and I'm really trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle as well. We're all on this journey as well. So, all of you who are truth seekers, it seems people who are following me are really kind of high vibe, deeply researched, positive people. Please don't hesitate to reach out on my website, thespellbreakerspodcast.com. There's a contact me page. I'd love to hear your guys' stories, what you're into, because we are in a very crazy world, right? For those of you who are still alive and sane and you know what's going on, like I say it often, give yourself a pat on the back, because we are in insane times, yeah, and a lot of people are struggling, so that's something I recommend as well, is like, guys, just reach out to your loved ones, family, friends, and just even a quick phone call can make the difference, because it's a very tough and isolating time to be alive. For me, I feel intuitively very optimistic about the future, and but I don't want to discount how a lot of people are struggling and suffering, because a lot of people are. So that's just a message I want to have, is to take the Christian approach, right? To take up the yokes of others, to help your neighbors, and in helping, Grumblefish, in giving, you do receive. That is very true, actually. And also, yeah, if you guys are able to support at all, it's very appreciated. Just lets me know I'm doing a good job, but I get times are tough too. But if you want to support, buymeacoffee.com/thespellbreakerspodcast. Also, soon I'm going to be selling some of my my fiance's goods. She's making like custom tallows, and we make my people have commented on my hair. I actually make my own what do you call it? Not gel, but I don't know, the old school stuff. I've been making it myself, all non-toxic, so I'm thinking of offering that is something you guys could buy that's non-toxic. But yeah, my goal would be to pomade. There you go. Yeah. Thanks, Grumblefish. Yeah, my goal is to do this full time. I don't know. I'd love to get your guys' suggestions as well. Do you guys think it's do you think I can do it? It's funny. Now Twitter even like just blocked my restreaming onto Twitter. I don't know why, for no reason. So it's really hard to, I think, break through. And a lot of the stuff that we're covering, I don't think a lot of people could even really handle it. So maybe I don't want to get super mainstream. And I always want to keep it real. There's certain things you can't talk about at a certain level. Of fame. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe that isn't the case. I don't know, but you know, uh, yeah, I'm really trying to, I hope, inspire everybody who's watching these shows. You know, it's kind of taking you with me on my journey to really learn these topics and skills. And I know I've been pissing off, I get a lot of hate from Gnostics and Christians, which I think is hilarious. But overall, I've been getting really positive responses. So I'd love to know what you guys think in the comment. And you know, am I doing a good job? Are there guests you'd like to see me interview? Are there you know, topics you'd like me to cover? And also, I'd love to hear yeah, offline or in the comments, your guys' own experiences, right? For those of you who this is resonating with, clearly we've been on a similar type of journey, you know, and so I'd really like to hear those stories from you guys. You know, I don't want to pretend like I'm some, you know, I'm not the only, you know, there's no hierarchy here. You know, a lot of people have reached out to me offline and provided really good insights and wisdom, you know, and I'm trying not to ever be doomer and always try to give solutions. We're going to have James Corbett on soon, if you guys know the Corbett Report, just to talk solutions, you know, and I think that's also very important right now. You know, it is a very perilous time we find ourselves in. But, you know, to me, I really think there's going to be a split between just like people who choose humanity and, you know, God and goodness and truth, and people who want to eat the bugs, live in a pod, do all that stuff. And hey, is, you know, that's just is what it is, you know. It's hard to predict the future, you know. It really is. And we got here Tubby Rainbow. I love these guys' names. Oh my god. Do you think you can do it? Oh, it doesn't matter what we think. Do you think you can do it? That's all that matters. There is always a way. Might not be the way you think. Your how might change, but does it wait? Yeah, I don't know. I just think full-time podcasting would be I think it'd be very interesting. You know, to me, I think it's kind of the pinnacle of humans. Like, if you can interview people who each person spent their life learning a deep truth, right? And you can interview this person for 2 hours and then learn how to apply that, and you give that to other people like yourself who's helping. I think that's kind of very high tier stuff that you can be doing, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just torn. I got so much stuff going on. I got my own business. I got my lady. I've been trying to get more fit. So right now it's just kind of a pet project, but yeah, I'd really love your guys' support. If you guys like this, like, please share and support in any way you can. And I love the encouragement, you know. Maybe I'll put more effort into this, you know. It's like our modern life, it just feels like juggling, you know, endless balls, right? It's like, oh, you know, my fitness is slipping, but my career is doing good, and then my spiritual life sucks, but my fitness is doing good, and then, you know, so yeah. Anyways, I like that comment, Tubby, and I'm gonna check Rumble here. We got Grumblefish just blowing up the chat here. Post interview show, you go over what your guest said would be a great addition. Yeah, that's what I was trying to do here. Maybe I should do better, is what he's saying. But yeah, I'll do a quick recap about Tom. You know, to me, look, I've been looking into this quite deeply, and to me, it is pretty clear that reincarnation exists. I've mentioned it before on the stream. If you look at the book Life Before Life, I think it's undeniable. Okay, I know some Christians hate that, but look, read the book, and you tell me what you think. Okay, I think that's clear. And then you look into near-death experiences, and it seems like 10% of them that they're using this idea of false light to trap us into a reincarnation trap. Now, I don't go as like doomer as Howdy does, and I love Howdy, by the way. Absolutely love the guy. But, you know, I think ultimately we are sovereign and sovereign beings, you know, so this might be just a, you know, I don't know what you want to call it, a roller coaster ride or a game that, you know, maybe out of boredom we choose to do, I don't like this idea that we're just slaves, perpetually indebted to some stupid aliens, and I think Tom strikes the balance too. I wanted to get, we talk about pretty heavy kind of doomer-esque topics, but I think it's important to talk about it a bit, but then say, hey, guys, all of us, every single thing we do, every action we take, positively impacts the world, right? And in ways that I don't think you can really calculate, right? If you really help somebody, okay, you really do somebody a solid, you have no idea, the ripple effect that has, right? Just even not engaging in negativity on social media. Like imagine if everybody for one day just posted like something that they find inspiring on social media. That's all they posted was like, hey, I got this garden. Hey, here's me in nature. Hey, here's me with communities having a barbecue. If everyone did that for a day, like it's game over. You know what I mean? So don't discount what you're saying. And on the alien topic, I'm not an expert. Tom is, so I really recommend checking out his stuff. But it does seem like it's a real phenomenon as well, and I looked into it, and yeah, I'm kind of in the aliens or demons camp, although demons are just disembodied spirits, right? So I kind of think aliens are almost embodied spirits, or they're kind of like robots, organic robots for either demonic or AI or something programmed, And then I do think there are also messages that I've heard, from aliens that I find really inspiring that I think could help humanity. So maybe, as Tom said, it is a mix of this, of there are good aliens, but the good aliens and spirits don't really want to impose, right? They're just kind of watching us, seeing what happens, kind of on the sidelines. Yeah, who knows? And what's funny too is you look into a lot of the alien stuff. Some of them are like starting to tell you about like climate change, like, oh, you're destroying the planet, and you gotta, you should kind of push world government, So I kind of think, it's pretty scammy, but maybe there are good aliens, And again, as I was saying before, this idea of us decoding, right? We don't see reality as it is. We're decoding it, right? So I think UFOs and aliens, this is a phenomenon that our senses aren't really able to properly interpret, right? Yeah, climate change aliens. I know, dude. It's real. They're like, you gotta recycle, Yeah, it's that made me very skeptical as well. And then also one other thing I'll talk about, and I might close it down here. I've been fasting all day, trying to lose some weight for my wedding. There's this split also with this whole soul trap and reincarnation trap. I'm gonna do a solo podcast on it, I think, but in general, if you look at like Dolores Cannon and a lot of these current, like, they're kind of neo new agers, they got their asses handed to them in 2012, and then they've kind of regrouped, and now, they think that there's no negative entities, there's no manipulation to come back here. Everything's peachy, everything's happy. We're gonna go into 4D reality, 5D even. It's gonna happen anytime as long as you're a good person and are vegan or something. And I think it's total bullshit. Like I think there are these entities that exist, and not everything's hunky dory. We are in a dualistic reality or realm, and that's just obvious to me. But and then where I struggle with the Christians is that also they think everything's evil and the devil, right? Like all of like Asian philosophy and thought for thousands of years is like of the devil, and and I just struggles, right? Because for me, one of the biggest game changers in my life was like the Eastern thought of cultivating presence and awareness. To me, that's been the biggest game changer in my life. And there's guys on like YouTube or Twitter now saying like even like yoga is like demonic, and you're like, bro, so I think Christians may get a little touchy, and I get it too, right? You don't want to be like weak sauce, so that's cool. There's no beef with the Christians, but I just think we gotta kind of, in a way that isn't too new agey, like learn from all of these different belief systems and figure out to you what's true, you know. And I got nothing but love for my Christian bros. You know, all my friends out here are like Christian, and they're based and they're living awesome lives that I would like everybody to have. I'm gonna do one more check on the comments here. Grumble, thank you. You don't know how aliens fit into simulation theory. Yeah, that's to me, if I were to put it, um I think, again, when we're saying simulation, we're not saying literally like you're trapped in a computer system, right? We're using it as an allegory or description for, you know, a phenomenon based, again, this is like this concept of decoding is huge, guys. I should probably do a full solo on it, but we're just decoding things based off our present awareness and like mental framework, right? So I don't think it's literally we're in a computer simulation like a lot of these tech bros think we are. I think it's like a phenomenon that's self generating by consciousness, and that there are conscious beings in it, and that consciousness is fundamental to it. It could be totally non-technological. It could just be a phenomenon that we don't fully understand. It's just the concept of simulation is the closest we have in our current lexicon to describe the phenomenon we see of the nature of reality, if that makes sense. And so for me, I think there is like a, I don't know, kind of like the Agent Smiths, right? In the Matrix, like they're the people keeping the things running and the simulation going, right? I think that's, to me, kind of what a lot of these aliens are. You know, they're kind of keeping this thing under wraps. And also, I do think there's certain groups that seem to be popping up everywhere. Whenever you research all of the bad things happening in the world, there seems to be certain groups that are responsible for all of it. And my current theory as well is that, again, they're kind of learned the nature or the code of the reality, and they're kind of being the enforcers somehow. You know, that's my theory. That's my current theory of what's going on and how it ties in. I think aliens are phenomena that's coming out of this realm and implanting in, and they seem to be kind of, yeah, control archetype. Let's see what else I got here. Nice, yeah. I was vibing the post interview segment. I don't know. Yeah, I thought it would be cool. It's like the Star Wars documentary, Star Wars or Dune. Oh man, I just recently watched Dune 2. And spoiler, the sand dies. No, I'm kidding. I told that to my friend. He's like, don't spoil it. I'm like, oh, the sand dies. Dune 2 was hype. I think honestly one of the only good movies of this year. Yeah, it's really sad too how shit all the friggin' movies are. You know, even that, like, imagine if we had good movies that had actually inspired people. You know, like, what about one movie where, like, a group of people come together and create a community separate from the system, and then they, like, have families and they're happy and they just live their lives. You know what I mean? Or humans come together in a trialing time or a natural disaster, and instead of just, like, you know, stealing and looting, they, like, come together and build a new parallel society, and they're way happier than before because they don't have pornography or Instagram. You know, that would be a cool story. You know, why can't these stories be told? And it's because they have to keep us so suppressed. Like, that's what people don't realize. Like, awakening is literally just an undoing of the garbage that they put on us. Like, our spirits, in my opinion, are like a beach ball, right? That, you know, its natural state is above the water, but you can, like, push it down, you know, and suppress it and suppress it and suppress it. But only for so long. And as Tom says, it's harder and harder and harder and harder to do, right? And so I really think that's where we're at, right? It's this mathematical certainty that something is going to happen, right? Every time they double down on their insanity, more people wake up, right? And I think, for my Canadian friends, I think this Bill C-61 is, I think that's going to be, I think actually, that could wake up the normies if they actually see it happening. I don't know though. I've been wrong before. So that's my thinking on that, Grumblefish. The spice must flow. Yeah. Any other? We got Tubby Rainbow. Layers on layers of simulation, and different people slash beings have different capabilities of seeing different aspects of it. Like when he puts on the lenses and They Live. Yeah, I love They Live, and I liked it before it was cool to like it. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, actually my favorite movie of all time is Dark City. I'm actually gonna make a movie list. I've been working on it, and then maybe do breakdowns on each of the movies. But yeah, They Live is cool. Dark City, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but for me, I think that's literally what's going on. As close to we can. Obviously, it's allegory, but I think it's as close to what's really happening as it can be. Mine is Gattaca. Gattaca is huge. That's an amazing movie. Ethan Hawke, I'm kind of mixed on him though. I know I struggle with him. He's like right on the edge of not liking, but then he like delivers incredible performances, and you're like, all right, yeah, yeah. Dark City is flat Earth. Yeah, dude, you flat Earthers. Oh my god. All right, I think that's it. I'm gonna close it down, guys. I want to thank you all for watching and staying for the post here. Yeah, I really hope you guys are getting value and benefit from what I'm doing here. And yeah, if you, for those of you, if you can support it all, please do so. But it's not mandatory. I get it. Times are tough. You know, Grumblefish, I know you're struggling, bro. Okay. Thanks, everybody.